Pomodoro technique. The Pomodoro technique is one of the simplest yet most revolutionary methods for unlocking focus and productivity. At its heart, it takes advantage of the human brain's natural rhythm of attention, breaking daunting study sessions into small, concentrated bursts of effort. Rather than forcing yourself to push through endless hours of fatigue and distraction, you dedicate just 25 minutes to full immersion in your work, followed by a short 5-minute break to reset your mind. These cycles, known as Pomodoros, transform studying into a game of endurance where you build momentum without burning out. What makes this technique so powerful is its psychological impact. By setting a timer, your brain perceives a finish line. It suddenly becomes easier to resist procrastination because the task feels temporary and achievable. You're no longer staring at hours of study stretching endlessly before you. You're simply committing to 25 minutes of deep focus, and anyone can survive 25 minutes. This small mental shift turns study into something you can conquer, session by session, brick by brick, until you've built entire walls of knowledge without realizing it. The beauty of Pomodoro lies in how it honors both discipline and compassion. Discipline in the sense that you train your mind to focus deeply, eliminating distractions and immersing yourself fully in the task at hand. Compassion in the sense that you reward yourself with regular breaks, signaling to your brain that effort is not a punishment, but a rhythm of work and rest. Over time, this technique rewires your relationship with studying. It creates urgency, sharpens concentration, and keeps fatigue at bay. By respecting your brain's natural cycles, you achieve more in less time, proving to yourself that productivity is not about suffering longer, but working smarter. Active recall. Active recall is one of the most brutally effective study techniques because it forces your brain to confront the truth. Do you actually know the material, or are you only fooling yourself by rereading it? Unlike passive review, which tricks you into feeling prepared, active recall demands that you pull information from memory without looking at your notes or textbooks. This mental struggle is precisely what strengthens memory pathways, carving knowledge deep into your brain until it becomes unshakable. The emotional power of active recall lies in the discomfort it creates. When you sit down with a blank sheet of paper and try to reproduce everything you know about a topic, you're instantly faced with the painful gaps in your understanding. That sting of realizing what you don't know can feel humiliating, but it is exactly what transforms you. Every gap you uncover becomes a target, a weakness you can attack and rebuild until it becomes your strength. This process of testing, failing, and correcting doesn't just help you remember, it rewires your brain for mastery. When you practice active recall consistently, something extraordinary happens. Concepts that once felt overwhelming suddenly come to you with ease. Facts that seemed slippery become second nature. Instead of crumbling under pressure during an exam, you experience the thrill of retrieving answers with clarity and confidence. Active recall turns studying from a passive activity into a battle, and every session is a victory that proves you're not just memorizing, you're conquering. By embracing the struggle, you elevate yourself above those who settle for comfort and illusion, and you become someone who actually owns the knowledge, ready to wield it when it matters most. Spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is the science of timing your learning so perfectly that your brain has no choice but to remember. It works on a principle that feels almost magical. Instead of cramming information in one exhausting session, you revisit it at carefully increasing intervals just before you're about to forget it. Each time you recall that knowledge, you interrupt the natural curve of forgetting, reinforcing the memory so powerfully that it begins to feel permanent, etched into your mind like stone. The emotional pull of spaced repetition comes from watching once fragile memories harden into unshakable knowledge. At first, you might struggle to remember, feeling the sting of near forgetting, but that very struggle is the fuel. Your brain, forced to reach deeper, strengthens the neural connections that lock the information in place. Every successful recall feels like a small triumph, a defiance of the brain's natural tendency to let go. You can almost feel your mind sharpening, as if you're training a muscle to grow stronger with each repetition. Unlike the fleeting confidence of cramming, spaced repetition builds a foundation that endures. Weeks later, months later, even years later, the information rises back to the surface effortlessly, while others scramble to relearn what they lost. It transforms learning into a long game, where consistency beats intensity and patience becomes the ultimate weapon. Each review session becomes a victory lap, proof that your memory is evolving into something others can't keep up with. Spaced repetition doesn't just help you study, it redefines your relationship with time itself, turning it into an ally that works for you rather than against you. Fineman technique. The Fineman technique is a brutally honest mirror that reveals whether you truly understand something or if you're just pretending. At its core, it's the art of stripping away complexity and explaining an idea as if you were teaching it to a child. If your explanation is tangled, full of jargon, or impossible to simplify, it exposes the painful truth. You don't really grasp it. But when you can explain a concept in simple, crystal clear language, you've transformed knowledge into mastery. The emotional charge of this technique comes from the humility it demands. You can't hide behind memorized words or fancy definitions. You're forced to confront your ignorance directly, and that confrontation can sting. Yet, in that sting lies power. Every time you stumble, every time you realize you can't explain something clearly, you've uncovered a weakness begging to be fixed. And when you go back, refine your understanding and return with a simpler, sharper explanation, the feeling is electrifying. You've turned confusion into clarity, chaos into order. The Fineman technique doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you a creator of understanding. You're no longer parroting information, you're reshaping it, molding it into something digestible, powerful, and alive. This method forces you to engage deeply, to wrestle with ideas until they bend to your will. And when you finally explain a complex theory with childlike simplicity, it feels like conquering a mountain with nothing but your bare hands. The Fineman technique is more than study. It's intellectual transformation, a brutal but beautiful path from illusion to true understanding. Mind mapping. Mind mapping is the art of turning the chaos of information into a living, breathing picture of clarity. Instead of drowning in endless lines of notes, you create a visual web where ideas connect, branch, and expand like the roots of a tree. At the center sits your core concept, and from it radiate associations, details, and examples, all woven together in a way that mirrors how your brain actually thinks. It's not just a technique, it's a creative explosion that transforms studying from dull memorization into a journey of discovery. The emotional force of mind mapping comes from the way it frees your mind. When you see ideas branching out in vibrant, connected patterns, knowledge stops feeling heavy and starts feeling alive. Each line you draw, each keyword you place, ignites a spark of understanding as you realize how concepts are not isolated fragments, but part of a grand structure. The visual impact is powerful. Suddenly, what once felt overwhelming is right in front of you, simplified, connected, and controllable. Mind mapping also awakens your creativity. It allows you to use colors, symbols, and images to anchor memory in ways words alone cannot. Your brain thrives on patterns and visuals, and a map full of connections feels almost magnetic, pulling information back to you effortlessly during recall. The act itself is engaging, almost playful, yet it creates a depth of understanding that rigid notes could never achieve. Mind mapping transforms the act of study into a form of art where knowledge flows like branches of thought, making you not just a student of information, but a master of connections. Interleaving subjects. Interleaving subjects is a study technique that feels chaotic at first, but unlocks a level of mastery most people never touch. Instead of drilling the same topic over and over until your brain goes numb, you deliberately mix different subjects, skills, or problem types in a single study session. One moment you're solving math equations, the next you're analyzing a piece of literature, then jumping to a foreign language exercise. It feels uncomfortable, even frustrating, because your brain craves routine, but that very discomfort is where the magic happens. The emotional punch of interleaving lies in the way it forces your mind to adapt. When you switch between subjects, your brain can't rely on autopilot. It has to reset, re-engage, and truly think. This struggle builds mental agility and strengthens your ability to recognize patterns across contexts. Instead of memorizing answers by rote, you're training your brain to differentiate, to spot the subtle cues that tell you when to apply one strategy versus another. Over time, this struggle sharpens your instincts, turning confusion into clarity. The brilliance of interleaving is that it prepares you for the unpredictability of real life. Exams, conversations, and challenges never come neatly packaged by topic. They demand flexibility. With interleaving, you stop being fragile, someone who only performs well when the world is structured, and become resilient, capable of handling variety and complexity with ease. While others collapse when faced with unfamiliar problems, you thrive because your brain is already conditioned to shift gears without fear. Interleaving may feel messy, but within that mess, your mind is forging the ability to think faster, deeper, and stronger than those who cling to comfort. Cornell note-taking method. The Cornell note-taking method is not just a way of writing notes. It's a system that forces your brain to process, organize, and internalize knowledge at a level most people never reach. Unlike messy scribbles or endless highlighted passages, this method structures your learning into 3 distinct zones: a main note-taking column, a cue column for questions or keywords, and a summary section at the bottom. On the surface, it looks simple, but beneath that simplicity lies a technique designed to make you engage with information actively, not passively. The emotional power of Cornell notes comes from how they demand discipline and clarity. When you write down main ideas during class or while studying, you're already filtering through noise, capturing only what matters. Later, when you fill the cue column with questions, you transform those notes into a personal testing ground. It's no longer just text on a page, it becomes a battlefield where you challenge yourself to recall, explain, and defend the knowledge you've written. And finally, when you force yourself to summarize at the bottom, you confront the ultimate question: do I truly understand this, or am I just pretending? This method prevents the illusion of learning and replaces it with accountability. Each page becomes a compact study guide, handcrafted by you, stripped of fluff, sharpened into weapons of memory. When exams arrive, Cornell notes feel like a secret weapon, organized, concise, and tailored to your brain's way of understanding. It's not just note-taking, it's a way of thinking, a way of breaking down the flood of information into something you can own, master, and recall with confidence when it matters most. Summarization in your own words. Summarization in your own words is a deceptively simple technique that turns passive reading into active mastery. Instead of copying notes word for word, you force yourself to distill complex ideas into language that feels natural to you. This act of translation is where the magic happens, because when you can explain something in your own voice, it means you've digested it, broken it down, and made it part of your mental framework. It's no longer a stranger's thought on a page, it becomes your thought, reborn and strengthened. The emotional force of this method lies in the struggle it demands. At first, the temptation is to cling to the original text, to hide behind the author's carefully chosen words, but the moment you push yourself to rewrite it Without peeking, you realize how much or how little you truly grasp. That vulnerability can feel uncomfortable, even exposing, yet it is in this discomfort that the mind grows. Each sentence you reconstruct becomes proof that you are not merely memorizing, you are internalizing. There's a deep satisfaction in watching a once intimidating concept unravel into something clear and simple under your own hand. The power of ownership fuels motivation because you're not just a student anymore, you're a storyteller of knowledge, bending it to your will. Summarizing in your own words transforms learning into creation, and creation into memory that sticks. It makes your notes more alive, more personal, and infinitely more powerful than any highlighted textbook could ever be. This technique doesn't just test your understanding, it forces you to claim it. Self-quizzing. Self-quizzing is the raw test of truth between what you think you know and what you can actually recall. It's not about rereading notes or highlighting lines that feel familiar. It's about closing the book, putting yourself under pressure, and asking the hard questions. When you quiz yourself, you drag information out of the shadows of your memory, forcing your brain to work, to struggle, and to strengthen. This active battle against forgetting is where real learning takes place, not in the comfort of passive review. The emotional weight of self-quizzing lies in the sting of failure. You write down a question, stare at it, and your mind goes blank. The frustration is real, and in that moment, many people quit. But if you lean into the discomfort, something shifts. That blank space becomes a burning signal. This is where you are weak. And every time you return, every time you fill that gap with the right answer, the weakness transforms into strength. The victory feels sharper because you've earned it through struggle. Self-quizzing transforms knowledge from a vague sense of familiarity into something you can wield under pressure. It simulates the stress of an exam, training your brain to retrieve information when it matters most. Each correct answer feels like a surge of confidence, proof that you own the material, while each mistake becomes fuel to improve. This constant cycle of testing, failing, and rising again forges unshakable memory. Self-quizzing is not just study, it is training for battle, where every question answered is another weapon sharpened in your arsenal. Flashcards are one of the most deceptively simple yet devastatingly powerful tools for mastering knowledge. At first glance, they look childish, tiny cards with a question on one side and an answer on the other, but beneath their simplicity lies a weapon for training the brain through the relentless power of recall. Each time you flip a card and force yourself to remember, you're pulling knowledge out of the depths of your memory rather than letting it sit passively on a page. That act of retrieval strengthens neural pathways, turning fragile facts into permanent knowledge. What makes flashcards emotionally gripping is the immediate feedback loop they create. You feel the rush of confidence when you answer correctly, a small victory that reinforces your progress. And when you fail, the sting of forgetting burns into your mind, making the corrected answer stick even harder. It's a cycle of challenge and reward, failure and triumph that keeps your brain engaged and hungry for more. Unlike rereading or highlighting, flashcards don't let you hide behind illusions of competence. They expose exactly what you know and what you don't. The genius of flashcards is their flexibility. You can use them for equations, vocabulary, theories, or even complex concepts broken down into bite-sized prompts. With systems like spaced repetition, flashcards become even more powerful, surfacing difficult cards more often and easier ones less frequently until mastery is inevitable. They turn studying into a game of mental endurance where every flip is a chance to sharpen your memory. While others drown in their notes, you're locked in a battle of questions and answers, training your brain to perform under pressure until knowledge becomes second nature. Dual coding, text plus visuals. Dual coding is the art of feeding your brain with two languages at once, words and images, and watching them fuse into unshakable memory. When you combine text with visuals, you're not just decorating your notes, you're activating entirely different regions of the brain that process information in parallel. Words alone can feel abstract and slippery, while images alone can feel incomplete. But when the two collide, when a diagram reinforces a definition or a chart brings a concept to life, the knowledge takes root in a way that feels almost indestructible. The emotional force of dual coding comes from how it transforms lifeless material into something vivid and unforgettable. Imagine reading about a complex biological process. Your mind struggles, the words blur, the meaning slips through your fingers. Now imagine sketching that process into a simple flow diagram or pairing it with a color-coded chart. Suddenly, the fog clears. The text becomes anchored, the image becomes a trigger, and together they form a memory that feels alive. It's no longer abstract theory. It's something you can see, feel, and recall. What makes this technique so intoxicating is the confidence it builds. When you study with dual coding, retrieval feels effortless. A single glance at a sketch can unlock paragraphs of explanation. A key phrase can conjure a mental image as sharp as the day you drew it. It's like leaving yourself breadcrumbs through the forest of knowledge. Only these breadcrumbs glow in the dark. Dual coding doesn't just help you learn faster. It makes your understanding deeper, richer, and impossible to shake. It turns study into creation and knowledge into something your brain refuses to forget. Teaching someone else. Teaching someone else is one of the most profound and transformative study techniques because it exposes the raw truth of your knowledge. The moment you step into the role of teacher, you are forced to take ownership of every detail, every connection, every gap in understanding. Unlike silent reading or memorization, teaching demands clarity. If you can explain a concept to another person in a way that makes sense, you've proven mastery. If you stumble, if you confuse them, the cracks in your learning are revealed with painful precision. The emotional impact of this technique is powerful. Standing before someone, even a friend, a sibling, or an imaginary audience, you feel the pressure to perform. That pressure sharpens your mind like a blade. You dig deeper, think harder, and uncover weaknesses you didn't know existed. And when your explanation finally clicks, when you see someone's eyes light up with understanding because of your words, the rush is intoxicating. It's not just knowledge anymore, it's influence. You've turned abstract information into something alive and transferable. What makes teaching extraordinary is that it transforms the learner into a leader. By breaking down a subject into simple, digestible steps, you are forced to restructure your own thinking in the process. You move beyond memorization into creation, weaving concepts together with your own logic. The act of teaching rewires your brain, solidifying the material in ways silent study never could. It is a technique that blends humility with power, forcing you to admit what you don't know while empowering you to master what you do. Blurting method. The blurting method is a ruthless test of your mind's honesty, a way of tearing down the illusion that rereading and highlighting create. Instead of passively reviewing notes, you close the book, grab a blank page, and blurt out everything you can remember about the topic. No peeking, no crutches, just raw recall poured straight onto paper. What comes out is the unfiltered truth of your memory, sometimes sharp and detailed, sometimes broken and patchy. But that honesty is exactly what makes the blurting method so powerful. The emotional intensity of this technique comes from the shock it delivers. When you first try it, the silence in your head can feel humiliating. Words don't flow, connections vanish, and you're left staring at your own ignorance. Yet in that discomfort lies the breakthrough. The mess on the page reveals precisely where your knowledge fails you. Every blank spot becomes a challenge, every forgotten detail a call to arms. And when you return to your notes afterward, you read with purpose, hungry to fill the holes that exposure created. The blurting method transforms studying into a confrontation with yourself. It takes away the safety net and forces you to wrestle with your memory. Over time, something remarkable happens. The gaps shrink, the flow strengthens, and the pages you fill become richer with detail and clarity. Each blurting session feels like a mental sparring match, and each improvement feels like victory. This method doesn't let you hide. It forces you to face the battlefield of your mind, and with every round, you come back sharper, faster, and undeniably stronger. Retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is the art of dragging knowledge out of your memory instead of simply rereading it, and it is one of the most emotionally raw yet transformative techniques in learning. Unlike the comfort of highlighting or passive review, retrieval forces you to face the terrifying question, do I actually remember this? That moment of silence, the frustration of grasping at half-formed ideas, feels uncomfortable, even painful, but it is exactly that struggle, that mental reach into the dark, that rewires your brain and makes the memory stronger. The beauty of retrieval practice lies in its honesty. There is no hiding. When you close your notes and test yourself, you are standing face to face with your ignorance, and every gap you uncover becomes a target for growth. That sting of failure is emotional fuel, embedding the correct answer deeper than passive review ever could. Each time you practice retrieval, you carve the pathways of memory wider and stronger until recalling information feels as natural as breathing. Emotionally, this technique transforms studying into a battle of resilience. Every failed recall is not a defeat, but a step forward, and every successful recall feels like a spark of triumph that proves your brain is evolving. Over time, retrieval practice builds an inner confidence that is unshakable. You no longer hope you know the material, you know it, because you've tested it under pressure. While others collapse in the heat of exams, paralyzed by the illusion of competence, you walk in armed with certainty, because retrieval practice has already trained your memory to rise when it matters most. Question-answer method. The question-answer method is the art of turning passive reading into an active interrogation, transforming your study material from a lifeless page into a living conversation with your own mind. Instead of merely absorbing information, you attack it by asking questions. What does this mean? Why is this important? How does this connect to what I already know? Every answer you attempt forces your brain to dig deeper, to recall, to connect, and to build pathways that lock the knowledge in place. The emotional intensity of this method lies in the shift it creates. Suddenly, you are no longer a passive consumer. You become the challenger, the investigator, the one in control. Each question becomes a test of honesty. Do you really understand this, or are you just nodding along? And when you can answer confidently, it ignites a surge of pride, proof that the knowledge is now yours. When you can't, the discomfort stings, but that sting is fuel, a spotlight showing exactly where you must focus. The question-answer method turns study sessions into battles of curiosity. Instead of trudging through endless pages, you sharpen your mind with sparks of inquiry, pushing yourself to think critically and creatively. Over time, your brain learns to anticipate questions, to prepare answers before they're even asked. Exams no longer feel like ambushes. They feel like familiar territory you've already conquered. This method awakens the natural learner inside you, the child who once asked why 1,000 times a day, and gives that instinct purpose. It is not just a way to study. It's a way to ignite your mind, to challenge yourself, and to make knowledge come alive in ways most people will never experience. Visualization. Visualization is the art of transforming abstract ideas into vivid mental images so powerful that your brain begins to treat them as real experiences. Instead of passively reading or listening, you paint pictures in your mind, diagrams, scenarios, even moving scenes that anchor knowledge deep into memory. The human brain is wired to remember images more than words, and when you attach concepts to clear visuals, you create mental hooks that make recall almost effortless. The emotional energy of visualization comes from its immersive quality. When you imagine a process unfolding step by step, or picture yourself solving a problem in real time, studying stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a simulation of mastery. Athletes use visualization to rehearse victories before they step onto the field. You can do the same in academics, rehearsing success before you face an exam. Each image etched in your mind feels like a rehearsal for triumph, and that confidence bleeds into reality. What makes visualization so compelling is its ability to engage creativity and logic simultaneously. You can turn a dry theory into a story, a boring formula into a moving diagram, a historical event into a living scene you can almost touch. This emotional depth makes the information come alive, making it impossible to forget. When you close your eyes and see knowledge as a vivid movie instead of static words, studying becomes less about memorization and more about experiencing. With visualization, you're not just storing information, you're living it, and living knowledge becomes unshakable knowledge. Creating analogies. Creating analogies is the art of transforming the abstract into the unforgettable, turning cold information into something your mind can feel, see, and relate to. At its core, it's about linking what you don't fully understand to something you already know intimately. When you compare the flow of electricity to water rushing through pipes or describe DNA as a recipe book for life, your brain seizes the image and refuses to let it go. Suddenly, what once felt distant becomes familiar, almost alive. The emotional power of analogies lies in how they make learning personal. Facts alone can feel dry and lifeless, but when you anchor them to a story, an image, or an experience you've lived, the information hits deeper. You're no longer memorizing isolated data. You're weaving it into the fabric of your own understanding. The moment an analogy clicks, it sparks that rush of clarity, that aha moment where confusion dissolves and everything makes sense. That flash of realization feels addictive, and it pulls you further into the subject with a hunger to create more connections. Analogies also empower you to own knowledge, not just repeat it. If you can explain a complex theory using a simple, relatable comparison, you prove to yourself that you've internalized the concept at its core. This is why great teachers, thinkers, and innovators lean on analogies. They bridge the gap between mystery and comprehension. Every analogy you create is more than just a memory tool. It's a creative act, a spark of mastery that makes learning not only effective, but deeply satisfying. SQ3R method. The SQ3R method is a study technique designed to turn reading from a passive act into a powerful weapon of comprehension and memory. Its name stands for survey, question, read, recite, review, and each step transforms the way your brain engages with text. Instead of letting words wash over you, SQ3R forces you to actively wrestle with the material, to break it apart and rebuild it in your mind until it belongs to you. The emotional force of this method begins with the survey stage. Before diving into the details, you scan headings, summaries, and visuals, giving your brain a map of what lies ahead. It's like preparing for battle. You know the terrain before you march in. Then comes question, where you challenge the text by turning headings into questions, igniting curiosity and tension in your mind. Suddenly, reading isn't just reading, it's a hunt for answers. As you read, the words carry more weight because your brain is searching, hungry to resolve the questions you planted. This turns passive reading into active pursuit, and every discovered answer hits with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The next step, recite. pushes you to stop and recall the information in your own words. This is where the struggle kicks in, where gaps are exposed and where knowledge hardens through effort. Finally, review ties it all together, forcing you to revisit and reinforce, ensuring nothing slips away. The SQ3R method transforms studying into a dynamic, emotional process of curiosity, struggle, and triumph. Instead of drowning in endless pages, you engage, question, and conquer, turning every text into an opportunity not just to read, but to remember. Highlighting with purpose is the difference between painting your notes in neon chaos and carving out a roadmap your brain can actually follow. Most people fall into the trap of bathing entire paragraphs in color, convincing themselves they're learning, when in reality they're only decorating the page. Purposeful highlighting flips that illusion on its head. Instead of drowning in yellow, you train yourself to strike only the essential words, the beating heart of the material, the fragments that spark recall and trigger deeper understanding. The emotional weight of this technique comes from restraint. When you hold back your highlighter, you're forced to make choices. Each stroke becomes a test of clarity. What really matters here? What's just fluff? That act of selection demands attention, focus, and judgment. It's uncomfortable at first because it strips away the comforting lie that everything is equally important, but in that discomfort lies transformation. Your brain learns to sift, to prioritize, to sharpen. Purposeful highlighting doesn't just make notes pretty, it creates anchors for memory. When you return to the text, your eyes land on the precise words that unlock entire chains of meaning. The page stops being a swamp of color and becomes a battlefield of triggers, each highlight a weapon ready to unleash what you've stored inside. And with time, you feel the power shift. You're no longer a passive reader glazed over by endless lines. You're the hunter, marking your prey, seizing only what matters and leaving behind the rest. Highlighting with purpose isn't about ink on paper. It's about reclaiming control of your focus and bending information to your will. Color coding notes. Color coding notes is more than just making your pages look pretty. It's a psychological trigger that transforms scattered information into a map your brain can instantly navigate. Each color becomes a symbol, a silent signal that tells your mind what matters most. Red screams urgency, blue whispers calm logic, green radiates growth and examples, yellow highlights essentials that must never be forgotten. By giving concepts their own visual identity, you create order in the chaos, carving paths of recognition that make studying faster and recall sharper. The emotional pull of this technique comes from how it makes learning feel alive. Opening a notebook filled with lifeless black text can feel draining, but a page marked with vibrant strokes feels like a landscape, each color sparking attention, guiding your eyes, pulling you deeper. Suddenly, your notes aren't just words on paper. They're a living system of meaning where each shade directs you toward focus and clarity. That rush of recognition when your brain instantly connects a color to an idea feels like unlocking a hidden superpower. Color coding also taps into memory through emotion. A highlighted sentence isn't just a fact, it's a visual anchor that burns itself into your mind. When you sit in an exam room and close your eyes, you won't just remember the words. You'll remember the glowing color that carried them. It's like leaving breadcrumbs for your brain to follow back to the answer. With every stroke of a pen or highlighter, you're not just decorating, you're training your mind to see knowledge as a structure, a pattern, a code that only you can crack. Concept mapping. Concept mapping is the process of taking knowledge out of the tangled web inside your mind and laying it out in a clear, interconnected structure. Unlike linear notes that trap ideas in rigid lines, a concept map spreads them out like a constellation, each idea connected to another with visible links that reveal the bigger picture. At the center, you place your main topic, and from it radiate branches of subtopics, details, and examples, each one tied together to form a visual representation of understanding. It's not just a study tool, it's a way of seeing how knowledge breathes and grows. The emotional force of concept mapping comes from the sudden clarity it delivers. Information that once felt scattered begins to click into place, and you can almost feel your brain sigh in relief. The overwhelming becomes manageable, the complex becomes simple, and the invisible connections between ideas shine like threads you hadn't noticed before. There's something deeply satisfying in watching a messy subject transform into a clean, living structure right before your eyes. What makes concept mapping unforgettable is how it mirrors the way your brain naturally works. Your mind doesn't think in straight lines. It leaps, connects, and builds webs of association. A map taps into this rhythm, making recall effortless because the knowledge is stored as a network rather than as isolated fragments. Studying with concept maps feels alive, like constructing a mental city where every road leads somewhere meaningful. Each time you create one, you're not just learning, you're building a blueprint of understanding that feels unshakably yours. Lightener system. The Lightener system is a deceptively simple yet brutally effective way to dominate memory, using nothing more than flashcards and discipline. At its core, it is a spaced repetition method that separates what you know from what you don't, forcing your brain to confront its weaknesses until they become strengths. Imagine a series of boxes. Cards you answer correctly move forward into boxes reviewed less often, while cards you fail stay behind, demanding your attention again and again. It's a relentless system of accountability, one that refuses to let your mind get away with laziness. The emotional impact of the Lightener system comes from the sharp contrast it creates between mastery and struggle. Every time you move a card forward, there's a surge of triumph, proof that knowledge has taken root. But when you fail and the card is dragged back, you feel the sting of defeat, the humbling reminder that your brain isn't as sharp as you hoped. That sting, however, is exactly what etches the correct answer deeper into memory. It is pain turned into power. Unlike passive study methods that lull you into false confidence, the Lightener system shines a brutal spotlight on what you don't know. It forces you to face your gaps again and again until they finally yield. Over time, you begin to crave the process because each cycle of struggle and mastery transforms your weaknesses into victories. The Lightener system is more than flashcards. It's a disciplined ritual of progress, a daily test of will and patience that builds an unshakable foundation of knowledge, leaving behind those who choose the comfort of forgetting. Elaboration. Elaboration is the art of breathing life into dry facts by weaving them into meaning, stories, and connections that your brain cannot ignore. Instead of passively memorizing, you expand on the information, asking how, why, and what it relates to until it stops being isolated knowledge and becomes part of a larger web of understanding. When you elaborate, you don't just know a fact, you know how it fits into the world, why it matters, and what it connects to, making it unforgettable. The emotional power of elaboration comes from the transformation it sparks inside you. Imagine reading that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Memorized alone, it's a lifeless number. But when you elaborate, tying it to the image of steam engines powering revolutions, to the way altitude shifts boiling points, to how it explains cooking pasta differently in the mountains, you're no longer memorizing. You're creating a universe of meaning around a single detail. That detail now glows in your mind, impossible to forget because it's anchored to everything else you know. What makes elaboration addictive is the sense of mastery it gives you. Each time you expand on an idea, you feel your understanding deepen, like roots spreading underground, interlocking and strengthening. Facts stop slipping away because they're no longer fragile. They're tied to stories, analogies, and experiences. Elaboration makes knowledge feel alive, as if your mind is painting with colors instead of tracing lifeless outlines. And with every connection you build, you become someone who doesn't just recall information, you own it, you embody it, and you can wield it with the force of true comprehension. Mental contrasting. Mental contrasting is a study technique that turns daydreaming into fuel for relentless action. Instead of simply imagining the glow of success, you deliberately contrast it with the brutal obstacles that stand in your way. You begin by picturing the outcome you crave, acing the exam, mastering a subject, or finally feeling the surge of confidence when you recall answers with ease. The image is vivid, intoxicating, almost addictive, but then comes the twist. You force yourself to confront reality, to see the hurdles that threaten to break that dream apart. The distractions, the procrastination, the fatigue, the self-doubt, they all rise like walls in front of you. This sharp contrast creates a psychological tension, a gap between where you are and where you want to be. That gap is painful, but is also the spark of motivation. Your brain feels the ache of wanting something you don't yet have, and instead of numbing yourself with empty fantasy, you transform that ache into action. Every obstacle becomes a challenge to crush, every barrier a test of your willpower. The dream doesn't fade, it hardens into a mission. The emotional force of mental contrasting lies in how brutally honest it is. It doesn't let you hide in wishful thinking. It forces you to stare at your weaknesses while holding your vision of success tightly in the other hand. That duality burns into your memory, pushing you to study not just because you want the dream, but because you know exactly what will kill it if you don't fight back. It is discipline born out of desire and fear, a psychological weapon that turns vision into victory. Chunking information. Chunking information is the art of taming overload by breaking chaos into order. Instead of drowning in a sea of scattered facts, you group them into meaningful units, small clusters your brain can hold, digest, and retrieve with ease. The human mind can only juggle a handful of items at once, but when those items are bundled into patterns, suddenly you can carry far more than you thought possible. A long string of numbers becomes a phone number, a random list of words becomes a story, and what once felt impossible to remember becomes natural. The emotional impact of chunking lies in the relief it creates. When you face a textbook full of dense information, panic sets in. How can anyone hold all of this? But the moment you begin breaking it down, shrinking vastness into smaller, digestible pieces, the fear gives way to control. It feels like carving order out of chaos, like watching an unscalable mountain split into steps you can climb. Each cluster becomes a foothold, and with every step, confidence replaces overwhelm. Chunking also awakens the joy of recognition. Your brain loves patterns, loves finding structure in the noise, and when you train it to see connections, memory feels less like brute force and more like intuition. Over time, these clusters fuse together into a strong framework, allowing you to recall not only the chunks themselves, but the details they carry within. Chunking is more than a memory technique. It's a mental weapon that turns the impossible into the achievable, giving you mastery over information that once threatened to bury you. Outlining key ideas. Outlining key ideas is the act of stripping away the noise of endless information until only the core truths remain, arranged in a structure your brain can easily hold on to. Instead of drowning in paragraphs of text, you extract the skeleton, the main arguments, the supporting points, and the essential details, and lay them out in a clear, logical order. It's like carving a statue out of raw stone. With each outline, the confusion falls away and the shape of real understanding emerges. The emotional power of outlining lies in the sense of control it gives you. When you first face a heavy chapter or dense lecture notes, the weight can feel suffocating, overwhelming your mind with too much at once. But as you outline, you feel that weight lift. Suddenly, the impossible becomes manageable. The chaos becomes order. Each key point you capture is like grabbing hold of a lifeline, pulling you closer to clarity. Outlining also sharpens memory through active engagement. As you decide what to keep and what to cut, your brain is forced to wrestle with the material, to evaluate, prioritize, and connect. That struggle locks the ideas deeper than passive reading ever could. Later, when you review your outline, you're not rereading a wall of text. You're revisiting the distilled essence of knowledge, a roadmap that guides you back through the terrain without getting lost. What makes this technique addictive is the confidence it breeds. By the time you've reduced pages of information into a tight outline, you don't just know the material, you own it. The outline becomes your creation, your weapon, something you can rely on when others are still fumbling through pages. Daily review sessions. Daily review sessions are the quiet but relentless force that separates fleeting knowledge from lasting mastery. Instead of letting yesterday's hard work fade into the shadows of forgetfulness, you bring it back into the light each day, refreshing it, sharpening it, and driving it deeper into your memory. This simple act of revisiting material daily transforms fragile understanding into unshakable certainty. It is repetition with rhythm, a steady heartbeat of learning that never lets your brain slip back into ignorance. The emotional pull of daily review lies in its compounding power. On the first day, the knowledge feels shaky, fragile, like trying to hold water in your hands. But the next day, when you return and review, you find it easier to grasp. A week later, it flows naturally, and a month later, it feels like it has always been part of you. Each review is a small act, almost invisible in its effort, but together they form an avalanche of momentum. You feel yourself becoming sharper, more confident, unstoppable. Daily reviews also carry a psychological thrill. There's a deep satisfaction in realizing that what once felt overwhelming now feels effortless. That information which used to intimidate you now bends to your command. It's the quiet joy of progress, the rush of mastery that builds in secret until one day you realize you've leapt far ahead of those who never bothered to review. Daily review sessions are not glamorous, but they are transformative, an invisible discipline that forges memory into steel and turns consistency into power. Creating mnemonics. Creating mnemonics is like turning your memory into a playground where even the driest facts and hardest details become sticky, unforgettable, and almost entertaining. At its core, a mnemonic is a mental shortcut, a rhyme, a phrase, an acronym, or even a ridiculous story that transforms something abstract into something your brain loves to cling to. Instead of drowning in endless repetition, you forge a bridge between dull information and vivid imagination, and suddenly, what once slipped through your fingers now refuses to leave your mind. The emotional spark of mnemonics comes from their creativity and humor. Our brains are wired to remember things that surprise us, make us laugh, or trigger emotion. When you take a list of complex terms and turn them into a funny sentence or a bizarre image, you hijack your brain's natural love for novelty. A dry formula becomes a quirky character, a list of historical dates becomes a catchy rhyme, and complicated sequences become as easy as recalling a silly story you invented yourself. That moment when you recall an exam answer thanks to a ridiculous phrase you made up feels almost magical, like tricking your brain into giving you secret access to knowledge. Mnemonics also create a sense of ownership. These aren't someone else's words anymore. They're your creations, your mind games. That personal connection makes recall faster and sharper because you didn't just learn, you designed the path to remembering. What once felt overwhelming now feels playful, and the joy of recalling with ease reinforces your confidence. Mnemonics prove that memory isn't about brute force. It's about crafting clever, emotional hooks that make knowledge impossible to forget. Acronyms. Acronyms are the brain's shortcut to memory, compressing heavy information into sharp, unforgettable codes. Instead of struggling to recall long lists or complex sequences, you condense them into a single word or phrase where each letter unlocks a hidden doorway to meaning. Suddenly, a flood of details is stored inside a compact key that your mind can access instantly. What was once overwhelming becomes a single spark that ignites an entire chain of recall. The emotional power of acronyms comes from the way they transform frustration into control. Imagine staring at a dense list of terms, your mind slipping and failing to hold them all at once. That sinking feeling of overload can crush motivation, but the moment you craft an acronym, the burden lifts. The weight of 10 items shrinks into one, and you feel the rush of clarity as your memory grips it with ease. That spark of mastery creates confidence. Suddenly, the impossible feels not only possible, but effortless. Acronyms also carry a creative thrill. Some are clever, funny, or strange enough to stick in your head forever, precisely because they're out of the ordinary. This oddness makes them powerful. Your brain clings to the unusual while discarding the mundane. Over time, the acronym becomes more than a tool. It's a trigger, a symbol of victory that instantly summons knowledge you thought you might lose. Acronyms prove that memory doesn't have to be painful. With creativity and compression, you can transform complexity into simplicity, and simplicity into power that others will envy. Acrostics are a memory technique that transforms abstract or overwhelming information into something playful, emotional, and unforgettable. At its core, an acrostic is a sentence or phrase where the first letter of each word corresponds to the first letter of the items you're trying to remember. It's a way of wrapping dry facts in a cloak of imagination, making them easier for your brain to grab hold of. What was once random and slippery suddenly becomes vivid and alive. The emotional spark of acrostics comes from their creativity. When you craft a sentence that's funny, bizarre, or even outrageous, it lodges itself in your mind with surprising stubbornness. Think of the joy of remembering the order of planets through a silly phrase, or the rush of pride when an invented acrostic unlocks a string of answers in the middle of an exam. These sentences stick because they make learning personal, something you created instead of something you're desperately trying to cram. What makes acrostics so powerful is how they connect emotion to memory. A dull string of letters means nothing, but a strange, humorous, or emotional sentence lights up your brain, making recall effortless. This technique turns studying into a game where imagination is your ally and boredom your enemy. Each acrostic becomes a secret code only you understand, a shortcut that transforms heavy memorization into something almost magical. When others struggle with raw repetition, you're smiling at the clever phrase that carries the answer straight into your hands. Storytelling memory method. The storytelling memory method is where cold, lifeless facts are transformed into living, breathing narratives that your brain cannot help but cling to. Instead of memorizing scattered pieces of information, you weave them into a story, full of characters, emotions, and vivid images that pulls you in like a novel you can't put down. Stories have been humanity's oldest memory tool, carrying knowledge through centuries before books ever existed, because our minds are wired to remember drama, conflict, and imagery far more easily than disconnected details. The emotional force of this method lies in its ability to make learning feel alive. A list of historical dates is dull and forgettable, but when those dates become milestones in a dramatic tale of struggle, triumph, or tragedy, they stick like glue. A string of scientific terms may feel impossible to grasp until you turn them into quirky characters in a story that unfolds step by step. Suddenly, studying isn't torture, it's creativity, play, and immersion. What makes this technique intoxicating is how it tricks your brain into caring. You're no longer just memorizing for the sake of exams. You're experiencing a journey, and each fact becomes a part of that journey's fabric. When you recall later, you don't just spit out answers, you relive the story, and the answers flow naturally, as if they were scenes you've already watched unfold. The storytelling memory method transforms study into art, making your mind the author of its own unforgettable worlds and turning knowledge into something you feel rather than something you merely recite. Lochi method. The Lochi method, also known as the memory palace, is one of the oldest and most powerful memory techniques, transforming ordinary spaces into vaults of knowledge. At its essence, you take information you want to remember and anchor it to specific locations in a place you know intimately: your home, your school, the walk to your favorite cafe. Each fact becomes an object you place along this mental journey, and when you later walk through the path in your imagination, the information springs back with startling clarity. The emotional force of the Lochi method comes from how deeply personal it feels. Memory thrives on connection, and by attaching knowledge to the walls of your bedroom or the steps of your childhood home, you fuse abstract facts with places that carry meaning and emotion. Suddenly, recalling isn't just mental effort, it's a vivid experience, like walking through a world that belongs entirely to you. The brain loves stories and places, and when your study material becomes part of that story, forgetting feels almost impossible. What makes the Loci method electrifying is its creativity. You're not just memorizing, you're building. You might picture a giant equation sitting on your couch, a historical figure standing by your front door, or a biological process unfolding on your kitchen counter. The stranger and more colorful these images, the stronger they stick. Walking through your memory palace becomes an adventure, a surreal landscape where knowledge lives. This technique doesn't just help you study, it transforms your mind into a stage where learning becomes unforgettable theater. PEG system. The PEG system is one of the most ingenious memory techniques ever created, a method that transforms numbers and lists into vivid, unforgettable images. At its core, it uses pegs, pre-memorized mental hooks, often tied to rhyming words or shapes, to store new information. For example, the number 1 becomes a bun, 2 becomes a shoe, 3 becomes a tree, and so on. When you need to remember a list, you attach each item to its peg using wild, exaggerated imagery. The result is a mental picture so strange and memorable that it refuses to fade. The emotional pull of the PEG system comes from its playful absurdity. Imagine trying to memorize a boring list of historical dates or scientific processes. Your brain resists, slips, forgets. But when you picture a flaming shoe stomping across your notes or a giant tree holding your formula in its branches, memory becomes entertaining. The ridiculousness makes it sticky. It feels almost like cheating, like bending your brain's natural limitations by turning study into a game of imagination. What makes the PEG system so powerful is that it's limitless. Once you've built your set of pegs, you can store endless information against them: lists, steps, formulas, speeches, retrieving each one by walking through your mental hooks. It creates a sense of mastery, as if you've discovered a secret code to unlock memory at will. Each time the system works, it triggers a jolt of confidence, proving you can conquer information others would crumble under. The PEG system doesn't just help you remember, it makes you feel unstoppable, as though you've hacked your own brain. Shadowing is a study technique that immerses you so deeply in learning that it feels as if you're living inside the material itself. It's most famously used in language learning, where you listen to a recording, whether it's a speech, audiobook, or conversation, and immediately repeat it out loud, word for word, in real time. At first, it feels like drowning, your tongue tripping, your brain scrambling to keep pace. But it's in that very struggle, that intensity of effort, where the transformation happens. The emotional power of shadowing comes from its raw immediacy. There's no time to stop, no space to overthink. You're forced to sync your mind, ears, and voice in perfect rhythm. The frustration of stumbling becomes fuel, and every time you push through a sentence without breaking, you feel a rush of victory that borders on addictive. It's more than memorization, it's embodiment. You don't just study the material, you become it, echoing its sounds, cadence, and flow until it feels natural in your own mouth. Shadowing builds more than memory, it rewires fluency. Your brain begins to anticipate, your tongue adapts, and your confidence soars. The effect is visceral. You hear yourself speaking with clarity, flowing with speed, and suddenly the subject no longer feels foreign, but alive within you. While others are stuck staring at notes, shadowing forces you into the fire of performance, training you for real-world recall under pressure. It's uncomfortable, exhausting, and at times overwhelming, but that is why it works. Shadowing transforms study into a living experience where knowledge stops being theory and starts becoming instinct. Spacing affect scheduling. Spacing affect scheduling is the discipline of aligning your study sessions with the brain's natural rhythm of forgetting, returning to material just before it slips away. Instead of overwhelming yourself in one marathon session, you stretch your learning over time, revisiting information at increasing intervals so that every recall feels like a rescue mission. Each time you pull knowledge back from the edge of being forgotten, you don't just save it, you engrave it deeper, transforming fragile memory into something unshakable. The emotional power of this method comes from watching weakness turn into strength. On the first encounter, you might feel shaky, fumbling, almost embarrassed by how much you've forgotten. But the second time, it's easier. By the third, it feels natural. By the fifth, it's effortless, as if the knowledge has always belonged to you. Every scheduled review becomes a small victory, a reminder that mastery is not about cramming harder, but about returning smarter. What makes spacing effect scheduling extraordinary is the confidence it builds. While others panic, cramming at the last minute and forgetting days later, you glide into exams with clarity, recalling details weeks, even months, after first learning them. It feels almost unfair, like a secret weapon only the disciplined know. This technique turns time into your ally rather than your enemy, stretching your memory's lifespan and giving you the thrill of recall exactly when you need it most. Spacing effect scheduling isn't just about remembering longer, it's about taking control of forgetting itself and bending time to serve your mind. Distributed practice. Distributed practice is the art of breaking free from the trap of cramming and instead spacing your learning over days, weeks, or even months. At its core, it respects the brain's natural limits, acknowledging that knowledge doesn't sink in when forced in a single sitting. It solidifies when revisited in smaller, consistent doses. Each session becomes a deliberate return, a reinforcement that strengthens memory until the information feels almost permanent. The emotional weight of distributed practice lies in the relief it brings. Cramming breeds anxiety, panic, and the hollow confidence that vanishes the moment you face a real test. But when you space your practice, you're no longer racing against time. You're aligning with it. Every session feels lighter, less overwhelming, because you're not trying to swallow the entire subject at once. Instead, you're building mastery brick by brick, watching knowledge accumulate steadily like a structure rising before your eyes. What makes distributed practice powerful is its quiet but undeniable impact. The struggle of recalling after a gap feels uncomfortable at first. You reach, hesitate, and sometimes fail. Yet that very struggle is what makes the memory stick. Each successful retrieval feels like a victory, a moment where your brain proves it has grown stronger. Over time, the fear of forgetting transforms into trust because you know the system works. Distributed practice is not just about studying smarter. It's about rewriting your relationship with learning. It turns knowledge into something that stays with you, not for the next exam, but for life. Deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is the brutal, uncompromising path to mastery. Unlike casual studying or mindless repetition, it demands that you attack your weaknesses directly, focus on what hurts the most, and push yourself beyond comfort again and again. It's not about clocking endless hours, it's about making every moment count, training with laser precision until the skills that once broke you become second nature. Where others repeat what they already know, deliberate practice forces you into the fire of failure so that you can emerge sharper, stronger, and unshakably prepared. The emotional weight of deliberate practice comes from its honesty. It exposes you. You sit down with your material, and there's no hiding from the cracks in your knowledge or the flaws in your technique. The sting of constant correction, the frustration of confronting your limits can feel unbearable, but it's exactly this struggle that rewires your brain. Every targeted repetition sculpts neural pathways. Every focused adjustment turns weakness into strength. And with each painful session, you're not just studying, you're transforming. What makes deliberate practice extraordinary is the way it builds resilience. You begin to crave the challenge, to seek out the edges of your ability, because you know that's where growth lives. Over time, the impossible becomes routine, and the skills that once intimidated you now feel like weapons in your hands. Deliberate practice is not glamorous, not easy, and not comfortable, but it is the difference between those who dabble and those who dominate. It is the forge where greatness is born and where the ordinary fall away. Testing effect. The testing effect is one of the most counterintuitive yet powerful truths about learning. You remember more by testing yourself than by studying longer. Instead of passively rereading notes or highlighting passages until your eyes glaze over, you deliberately quiz yourself, forcing your brain to pull answers out of memory. That act of retrieval is the secret weapon. Each time you struggle to recall, each time you feel that flicker of doubt before the answer surfaces, your memory of the material grows stronger and more durable. The emotional grip of the testing effect comes from the battle it creates inside you. Testing feels risky. It exposes weaknesses. It shows you the painful gaps you'd rather ignore. But that exposure is where growth begins. The sting of a wrong answer is not failure. It's fire, burning the correct information into your memory far deeper than passive study ever could. The joy of getting it right, especially under pressure, creates a rush of confidence that becomes addictive. Suddenly, knowledge isn't fragile. It's battle-tested. The beauty of the testing effect is how it transforms pressure into preparation. While others crumble in exams because they've only rehearsed passively, you walk in already conditioned to perform. You've trained your brain to deliver under stress, to dig into its vault of knowledge and pull answers out with clarity. The testing effect doesn't just prepare you for the exam, it rewires your brain to thrive under challenge. It proves that true learning isn't about comfort. It's about daring to face the test long before anyone else does. Peer teaching. Peer teaching is the raw act of stepping out of the role of student and into the role of teacher. And in that transformation, you discover whether you truly understand or whether you've only been pretending. When you explain a concept to someone else, whether a classmate, a friend, or even someone who knows nothing about the subject, you are forced to simplify, clarify, and organize your knowledge in a way that makes sense outside your own head. In doing so, you expose gaps, confront confusion, and build mastery that reading alone could never give you. The emotional intensity of peer teaching comes from its vulnerability. You put your understanding on the line, risking the embarrassment of stumbling or being questioned, yet it is precisely in those moments of struggle that your brain sharpens. Each question from your peer is a challenge, each hesitation a signal of where you need to grow. And when you do explain successfully, when you see the light of understanding flicker in their eyes, it feels exhilarating, a rush of proof that you don't just know the material, you command it. What makes peer teaching unforgettable is the transformation of identity. You stop being a passive learner and become a guide, a mentor, someone shaping knowledge for another human being. The act of teaching doesn't just reinforce memory, it hardwires confidence. You begin to realize that knowledge is not truly yours until you can give it away, and in giving it, you solidify it within yourself. Peer teaching is not just study, it is ownership, mastery, and the thrill of proving to yourself that you can lead others through the very terrain you once struggled to cross. Group study discussions. Group study discussions are a powerful way to transform isolated learning into a dynamic exchange of ideas that sparks deeper understanding. At their core, they harness the energy of collaboration, taking what you know, what others know, and colliding those perspectives into something greater than the sum of its parts. Instead of passively absorbing information alone, you are thrown into an environment where you must explain, defend, and sometimes even challenge your own knowledge. Every question asked by someone else forces you to think sharper. Every explanation you give solidifies your mastery, and every debate reveals gaps you didn't even realize were there. The emotional intensity of group discussions comes from their unpredictability. When you study alone, you control the pace, the material, and the comfort zone. But in a group, you're exposed. You can't hide from what you don't know. If someone asks you to explain a concept and you stumble, the truth hits hard. Yet that sting is also the spark that drives growth. It lights a fire under you to go back, dig deeper, and come prepared next time. And when the opposite happens, when your words unlock clarity for someone else, the rush of empowerment is unforgettable. You feel yourself becoming not just a learner, but a contributor, a leader, someone who elevates the room. What makes group study discussions unforgettable is the connection they create. Shared struggles and shared breakthroughs forge bonds, and learning becomes a team victory. The energy of others pushes you to focus harder, think faster, and retain more, transforming the lonely act of studying into an arena of growth and camaraderie. Summarizing with diagrams. Summarizing with diagrams is the act of taking sprawling, complicated information and compressing it into a single, striking image your brain can instantly grasp. Instead of drowning in paragraphs of text, you distill knowledge into charts, arrows, cycles, and symbols, visual blueprints that capture the essence of a topic at a glance. When you transform words into visuals, you bypass the sluggishness of rote memorization and tap into the brain's natural love for patterns and pictures. Suddenly, entire chapters of detail are condensed into a map you can scan in seconds, a map that sticks far longer than sentences ever could. The emotional force of this technique lies in the sense of power it gives you. Imagine staring at pages of notes, anxiety rising as your eyes glaze over. Then you sketch a single diagram, boxes linked with arrows, a cycle circling endlessly, a hierarchy laid out clearly, and the chaos collapses into order. That rush of clarity, that aha moment, feels like lifting a weight off your chest. What seemed overwhelming becomes controllable, and your confidence surges because now the knowledge is yours, simplified, organized, and ready to be recalled. The beauty of diagrams is that they trigger memory through imagery. A single shape can summon entire explanations. A flowchart can guide you through a process without hesitation. The act of drawing itself deepens learning, engaging your hands, eyes, and mind together. Summarizing with diagrams doesn't just record what you've learned, it burns it into your memory, creating visual anchors you can summon in exams or discussions with electrifying ease. It transforms studying from mechanical repetition into a creative act of mastery. Writing essay, answers from memory. Writing essay, answers from memory is one of the most demanding yet transformative study techniques because it strips away all safety nets and forces you to stand alone with your knowledge. Instead of leaning on notes, textbooks, or outlines, you sit down with a blank page and attempt to construct a full essay purely from what you recall. The experience is raw. It exposes what you know with piercing honesty, while also revealing the painful holes in your understanding. But within that discomfort lies its power. The emotional weight of this technique is undeniable. As your pen hovers over the page, there's a rush of pressure, the same kind of pressure you'll face in an exam room. Your brain races, your heart pounds, and you're forced to summon clarity out of chaos. At first, it feels overwhelming. Sentences falter, points are forgotten. But as you persist, something incredible happens. Ideas begin to flow, connections form, and the act of writing carves knowledge deeper into your memory than any amount of passive reading ever could. Every completed essay, even if imperfect, is a victory. The satisfaction of seeing your thoughts stretched across a page, born solely from recall, gives you unshakable confidence. You're no longer just hoping you'll remember in the exam. You've proven to yourself you can. This practice conditions your brain to think, organize, and express ideas under the very same conditions you'll be tested in. Writing essay answers from memory doesn't just prepare you for exams, it forges resilience, turning anxiety into strength and transforming knowledge into a weapon you can wield fluently when it matters most. Using past exams. Using past exams is like stepping into the battlefield before the real war begins. It is not passive practice. It is a brutal confrontation with the exact style, pressure, and traps you will face when everything is on the line. Past exams expose you to the structure of questions, the pacing, and the subtle ways examiners test not just knowledge, but endurance, clarity, and nerve. By wrestling with these old papers, you're not just studying, you're rehearsing survival under fire. The emotional force of this technique lies in its realism. Reading notes gives you comfort, highlighting feels safe, but when you sit down with a past paper and force yourself to answer under time conditions, comfort vanishes. Suddenly, your weaknesses glare at you. The questions you misread, the facts you forgot, the problems you couldn't solve fast enough. It feels humbling, sometimes crushing, but that sting is exactly what makes it transformative. Every mistake is a warning delivered in advance, a second chance to fix what could have destroyed you on the actual exam. The thrill of using past exams comes with progress. The first attempt may feel like chaos, but as you continue, patterns emerge. Questions become familiar, answers flow faster, and your confidence builds like armor. What once felt impossible begins to feel predictable, and when the real exam arrives, you don't walk in blind. You walk in already battle-tested. While others panic at the unfamiliar, you smile at the familiar rhythm of the questions, ready to strike. Using past exams is more than practice. It is training for war, ensuring that when the moment comes, you are not just prepared, you are unstoppable. Practice under exam conditions. Practicing under exam conditions is the ultimate rehearsal for the real test, a technique that forces your brain and body to adapt to the pressure of performance. It's more than just answering questions. It's about recreating the environment, the silence, the ticking clock, the limited time, and the absence of notes or shortcuts. When you sit in that controlled stress before the actual exam, you teach yourself to remain calm, focused, and sharp when it matters most. The emotional power of this method lies in how brutally honest it feels. There is no comfort, no safety net. Every skipped question, every second loss, staring blankly at a problem, exposes the truth of your preparation. At first, it's intimidating, even discouraging, because the illusion of confidence you gain from casual review shatters under time pressure. But this sting is exactly what makes the technique transformative. By facing the discomfort now, you rob the actual exam of its ability to paralyze you later. Each practice session becomes a battlefield where you wrestle with time, stress, and uncertainty. Every small improvement, finishing a section faster, recalling answers with more clarity, handling the rush of adrenaline with steadiness feels like a victory. Over time, your fear of exams is replaced with resilience, even excitement, because the conditions no longer control you. You control them. Practicing under exam conditions trains not only your intellect, but your nerves, shaping you into someone who doesn't just know the answers, but thrives when the pressure is at its peak. Practice problems first, theory later. Practice problems first, theory later is a study method that flips traditional learning on its head. Instead of drowning in definitions, rules, and long explanations before daring to attempt a problem, you dive head first into the challenge. You wrestle with the problem before you feel ready, letting your confusion, mistakes, and guesses expose the gaps in your understanding. This raw encounter with difficulty makes theory come alive when you finally study it, because now the explanations are answers to struggles you've already felt in your bones. The emotional intensity of this approach comes from the discomfort it forces you into. Staring at a problem without the safety net of theory feels intimidating, even humiliating at first. Your mind screams that you're unprepared, that you'll fail, and yet, in that failure lies the spark of real learning. Every wrong attempt, every frustrated pause, primes your brain to crave the solution. When you later turn to theory, it's not abstract anymore. It's a relief, a resolution, a weapon you've been desperate to grasp. This method trains resilience as much as it trains memory. It simulates the raw pressure of exams, where you won't be handed a textbook before answering. By practicing problems first, you sharpen your instincts, teaching your brain to think, adapt, and fight for solutions. Over time, the struggle that once scared you becomes addictive. You begin to crave the challenge, to chase problems like puzzles waiting to be cracked. And when the theory finally locks into place, it doesn't just sit in your head. It burns there, forged by the friction of effort and discovery. Error, correction, review. Error, correction, review is the brutal but transformative process of turning your mistakes into the sharpest tools for growth. Instead of brushing past errors with embarrassment or denial, you dive straight into them, dissecting what went wrong and why. Every wrong answer, every flawed explanation, every gap in logic becomes a mirror reflecting your weaknesses. At first, it feels harsh. Nobody enjoys staring at their failures. But the truth is that mistakes are the most honest teachers you will ever have. The emotional power of this technique lies in its sting. When you see an error, it triggers frustration, even shame. But that pain is what brands the correction into your memory. The brain is wired to remember emotionally charged moments, and a mistake paired with correction leaves a scar that strengthens recall. That sting becomes fuel, ensuring you never trip over the same stone twice. Over time, you begin to welcome mistakes, not fear them, because each one becomes an opportunity to solidify your knowledge. Error correction review also builds resilience and self-awareness. Instead of blindly repeating the same patterns, you become surgical, learning to spot traps, anticipate pitfalls, and develop strategies to avoid them. The process shifts your mindset from fearing failure to hunting for it, because every mistake you uncover now is one less mistake you'll make when it truly counts. While others gloss over their errors and repeat them in exams, you are sharpening yourself on the whetstone of failure, each correction making you stronger, sharper, and more unstoppable in your pursuit of mastery. Redoing mistakes until mastery. Redoing mistakes until mastery is the relentless pursuit of turning your failures into stepping stones, hammering away at your weaknesses until they transform into your strongest weapons. Most people glance at their errors once, feel the sting of disappointment, and then move on, hoping it won't happen again. But mastery is not born from avoidance. It's born from confrontation. When you take every mistake, dissect it, and redo it until it bends to your will, you teach your brain that failure is not the end, but the forge where real learning is created. The emotional power of this technique comes from its intensity. The first time you face the same mistake again, frustration burns. It feels like the universe mocking you. But as you attack it over and over, something shifts. What once felt like an enemy begins to feel familiar, then manageable, and finally conquered. That rush, the moment a concept that once humiliated you now flows effortlessly, is addictive. It is proof that you are no longer the same person who failed. You are someone stronger, sharper, transformed by persistence. Redoing mistakes until mastery builds resilience in a way few other techniques can. It teaches you to stop fearing failure and start using it as fuel. Each corrected error becomes a scar that reminds you of the battle you fought and won. Over time, mistakes stop being roadblocks and start being opportunities, each one a hidden invitation to grow. This method is not easy. It demands patience, grit, and humility, but the payoff is unstoppable confidence. By redoing mistakes until mastery, you transform your weaknesses into proof that you cannot be broken. Self-explaining while reading. Self-explaining while reading is a technique that transforms passive consumption into active mastery by forcing you to become both student and teacher in real time. Instead of letting words flow past your eyes in silence, you stop and explain each concept to yourself out loud or in your mind, as if you were teaching it to someone who knows nothing. This constant dialogue with the material turns reading from a quiet activity into a mental workout where every line must be justified, connected, and understood. The emotional impact of this method is undeniable. At first, it feels slow, even frustrating. You stumble over explanations, you catch yourself unsure, you realize that what looked simple on the page isn't so simple when spoken aloud. That sting of exposure cuts deep because it forces you to confront how much you've been glossing over. Yet in that discomfort lies transformation. Every shaky explanation sharpens into clarity. Every gap you uncover becomes a doorway to deeper learning, and the act of hearing your own words makes knowledge feel more real, more alive. There is a strange thrill in this process. When you suddenly explain a paragraph perfectly in your own words, you feel the surge of ownership. This isn't just something you read, it's something you know. Over time, the voice in your head becomes sharper, quicker, and more confident, until reading is no longer a passive act, but a conversation with knowledge itself. Self-explaining while reading doesn't just fill your memory, it engraves understanding into your mind, one sentence at a time. Paraphrasing complex texts. Paraphrasing complex texts is the discipline of taking dense, intimidating material and translating it into your own words, words that feel natural, alive, and unforgettable. Instead of copying definitions word for word or drowning in jargon that numbs your brain, you strip the concept down, wrestle with its meaning, and rebuild it in a language you own. This process doesn't just simplify knowledge, it forces you to prove to yourself that you truly understand it. If you can't explain it clearly without leaning on the original phrasing, then you don't really know it yet. The emotional weight of paraphrasing lies in the battle it creates between confusion and clarity. At first, the text looms like a wall of impenetrable language, each sentence heavy with complexity. It feels overwhelming, frustrating, even discouraging. But when you break it down, sentence by sentence, and force your mind to retell it in your voice, something shifts. That overwhelming wall begins to crumble, replaced by the thrill of understanding. Each successful paraphrase feels like a small conquest, proof that you've taken ownership of something that once felt out of reach. Paraphrasing also awakens a deeper connection to the material. It's no longer just information sitting on a page. It's knowledge reshaped by you, tied to your memory and your style of thinking. When you encounter it again, the familiarity is startling, as if you've already integrated it into your own mind. This act doesn't just test your comprehension, it strengthens it, transforming borrowed words into personal knowledge that sticks because it now belongs to you. Using retrieval cues. Using retrieval cues is the art of planting mental anchors that help your brain pull hidden memories back into the light. Instead of struggling in silence when an answer feels just out of reach, you create associations, words, images, smells, even emotions that act like keys to unlock the memory. It's the difference between being lost in a dark room and suddenly flipping on a light switch that reveals the path. Retrieval cues don't give you the answer, they guide you to it, letting your brain complete the connection on its own. The emotional power of this technique lies in the moment of breakthrough. You know the frustration of having knowledge on the tip of your tongue, trapped just beyond reach. A cue, a single phrase, an image, a song lyric can unleash that memory with almost magical force, flooding you with the relief and satisfaction of remembering. The brain craves patterns and connections, and cues exploit this hunger, weaving your knowledge into a web of triggers that make recall faster, smoother, and more reliable. What makes retrieval cues so powerful is their adaptability. You can tie a difficult fact to a vivid story, anchor a formula to a rhythm, or connect an abstract concept to a visual symbol. Over time, these cues become shortcuts, reducing the mental strain of recall and giving you confidence that your memory won't fail when it matters most. While others stumble in silence, you pull answers with ease, guided by the triggers you've planted in advance. Retrieval cues transform memory from something fragile into something dependable, like an army of hidden allies waiting to rush forward when called. Guided practice is the bridge between uncertainty and independence, the space where you sharpen your skills under the safety and structure of guidance before stepping into full mastery on your own. Unlike unguided repetition, where mistakes can go unnoticed and bad habits take root, guided practice gives you the watchful eye of a teacher, mentor, or structured resource that corrects, shapes, and refines your performance in real time. It is not about being spoon-fed, it is about being pushed, corrected, and supported until you can carry the weight alone. The emotional pull of guided practice comes from the mixture of security and challenge. You know you are not alone, you have a safety net, but at the same time, you are expected to push harder than you would on your own. Every correction may sting, every redirection may bruise your ego, but those very adjustments accelerate your growth. The frustration of being told you're wrong transforms into the thrill of realizing that each mistake you fix under guidance is one less weakness you'll carry into the future. Guided practice also awakens a deep sense of momentum. Instead of drowning in confusion or wasting hours guessing, you feel yourself moving forward with clarity. The presence of feedback turns uncertainty into progress, and progress into confidence. Over time, the training wheels come off. You find yourself solving, explaining, and performing without hesitation, carrying within you the echoes of every correction once given. Guided practice is not about dependency. It's about building mastery faster, smoother, and stronger than you ever could alone, turning guidance today into independence tomorrow. Learning by analogy. Learning by analogy is the art of transforming the unfamiliar into the familiar, taking something complex and tying it to an image, story, or concept you already understand. At its core, it's about bridging the gap between the known and the unknown. Instead of memorizing a dry equation or abstract theory, you breathe life into it by comparing it to something vivid and relatable. A chemical reaction becomes a crowded dance floor. An electrical circuit becomes flowing water. A historical conflict becomes a family feud. These parallels don't just simplify, they anchor the new knowledge into your memory by wrapping it around something you already grasp. The emotional force of analogy comes from its power to make intimidating material suddenly feel within reach. When your brain encounters something foreign, the natural response is resistance, confusion, frustration, even fear. But when you tether that alien idea to a concept you already know, the fear dissolves, replaced by a spark of recognition. It feels like decoding a secret message, like pulling back a curtain to reveal that the complicated is really just a new form of the familiar. That moment of clarity, when the light bulb goes off, floods you with confidence and excitement. What makes learning by analogy unforgettable is its creativity. You're not just absorbing knowledge, you're crafting mental stories, weaving webs of connection that make your understanding unique. The stranger and more personal the analogy, the stronger it sticks, because it's tied not just to logic, but to emotion. With analogies, you're not memorizing facts, you're building a world where knowledge lives in characters, images, and stories that your brain refuses to forget. Audio recording notes. Audio recording notes is the practice of turning your own voice into a powerful study tool, transforming lectures, readings, or even your personal summaries into portable memory triggers. Instead of relying solely on handwritten notes or dense textbooks, you speak the material out loud, record it, and carry it with you, ready to replay while walking, commuting, or lying in bed. Hearing information in your own voice sparks a strange intimacy. It feels familiar, personal, and deeply connected to your memory, as though your past self is guiding your present self through the material. The emotional force of this technique lies in the freedom it creates. Studying no longer traps you at a desk, chained to silent pages. With audio notes, your learning moves with you, filling the quiet spaces of your day with bursts of reinforcement. What once felt like wasted time, waiting in line, driving, exercising, suddenly becomes an opportunity to grow sharper. Each replay strengthens the pathways in your brain, embedding the knowledge deeper until recall feels natural and effortless. Listening also awakens another layer of memory, the power of sound. Your brain ties words to rhythm, tone, and cadence, making recall easier because you're not just memorizing concepts, you're replaying a voice you know by heart. And when that voice is your own, the impact is doubled. Every time you listen, you reinforce the belief that you are capable, that you are actively building mastery. Audio, recording notes transform passive review into a living dialogue with yourself, one that follows you everywhere and refuses to let knowledge slip away. Listening to notes on repeat. Listening to notes on repeat is a study technique that turns your own voice, or the voice of a trusted recording, into a constant companion that quietly ingrains knowledge into your subconscious. Instead of only relying on reading and writing, you harness the auditory power of memory. You record your notes, lectures, or explanations, then play them back again and again, whether you're commuting, walking, or lying in bed. At first, it feels passive, almost too easy, but with repetition, the words start to sink into your mind until they feel etched into your very thoughts. The emotional grip of this method comes from its intimacy. Hearing your own voice or a familiar tone, echoing knowledge creates a strange closeness with the material. It becomes part of your internal dialogue. There's a subtle thrill in catching yourself reciting along without effort, as if the information has woven itself into your automatic memory. What once felt heavy and abstract now flows naturally, like lyrics of a song you didn't even realize you memorized. Listening on repeat also transforms dead time into learning time. Moments that most people waste, commutes, chores, idle minutes before sleep, become opportunities for reinforcement. This consistency builds a sense of momentum and control, as though you're constantly surrounding yourself with knowledge, refusing to let it slip away. Over time, the material becomes so familiar it feels second nature, slipping off your tongue with ease. While others confine studying to the desk, you carry it with you everywhere, turning your environment into a classroom and your own voice into the soundtrack of mastery. Creating practice questions. Creating practice questions is the transformation of studying from passive review into active challenge, where you stop consuming knowledge and start producing it. When you craft your own questions, you force your brain to think like the examiner, to identify the core of the material, to twist it into problems, and to anticipate how it could be tested. In that act, you don't just memorize facts, you internalize patterns, sharpen critical thinking, and prepare yourself for the battlefield of real exams. The emotional power of this technique comes from the shift in control. Instead of fearing what questions might appear, you become the one writing them. You taste the authority of the test maker, and suddenly the material bends under your command. Each question you write and then attempt to solve reveals the gaps in your armor. At first, those gaps sting. They show you exactly what you don't know. But with every answer refined, every misunderstanding corrected, you feel yourself grow sharper, stronger, unshakable. The thrill of creating practice questions is that it turns anxiety into power. The unknown becomes familiar. The unpredictable becomes predictable. When the real test arrives, nothing feels foreign. You've already battled the concepts in every form your imagination could create. While others panic at the sight of tricky problems, you smile because you've trained your brain to expect and outsmart them. Creating practice questions doesn't just prepare you, it transforms you from a passive student into an active strategist, the kind of learner who doesn't just survive exams, but dominates them with precision and confidence. Anticipating exam questions. Anticipating exam questions is a technique that shifts you from being a passive learner to thinking like the examiner themselves. Instead of simply absorbing material, you step into the mindset of the person designing the test and ask, if I wanted to challenge someone's understanding of this subject, what would I ask? This mental shift turns your study sessions into strategic preparation, where you don't just learn the facts, you prepare to face them in the exact form they're most likely to appear. The emotional spark of this method comes from the sense of control it gives you. Exams often feel like ambushes, full of unpredictable traps. But when you train yourself to anticipate the questions, the fear begins to dissolve. You start noticing patterns in lectures, in textbooks, in past papers, and suddenly the material feels less like an ocean and more like a roadmap. The thrill comes when your guesses align perfectly with what appears on the test. It feels like unlocking a secret code, like outsmarting the very system that was designed to test you. Anticipating exam questions also pushes you deeper than surface-level memorization. To predict what could be asked, you have to truly understand the material, its core principles, its weak spots, its connections. That process forces you to master the subject, not just skim it. And when you walk into the exam hall, you don't feel like a victim waiting to be tested. You feel like a strategist walking into a battle you've already rehearsed. This technique doesn't just prepare you, it makes you sharper, more confident, and infinitely harder to catch off guard. Reverse outlining. Reverse outlining is the art of dismantling a complex text to expose its skeleton, the hidden structure that holds it together. Instead of passively reading and hoping the meaning will sink in, you take what you've read and force yourself to map its outline after the fact, paragraph by paragraph, idea by idea, breaking the chaos into a clear framework. The act feels like dissecting a living body of words, cutting it open until you can see the bones beneath. Once you've laid out the structure, the fog of confusion lifts, and what once felt dense suddenly becomes organized, logical, and yours to command. The emotional intensity of reverse outlining comes from the moment you confront just how much you missed during the first read. You may stare at a section, struggling to decide what its main point even was, and that sting of realization can feel humbling. But that discomfort is where the magic begins. By pulling apart the text, stripping away the excess, and forcing yourself to summarize its core ideas, you not only reveal its logic, but also sharpen your own thinking. Every time you succeed, it feels like cracking a code, turning a mess of words into a clean blueprint that fits inside your mind. Reverse outlining is not about memorizing, it's about control. It transforms you from a passive consumer of information into an active architect of understanding. Over time, your outlines become mental maps you can navigate with ease, guiding you back to the big ideas without drowning in details. This technique trains you to see the hidden order in chaos, and once you master it, even the most intimidating texts lose their power to overwhelm you. Using spaced repetition software. Using spaced repetition software is like strapping your brain to a machine built for mastery. Instead of relying on guesswork or blind review, you put your trust in an algorithm designed to predict the exact moment you're about to forget, and then it pulls the memory back just in time. Programs like Anki or Quizlet use this principle to schedule your reviews with ruthless efficiency, ensuring you spend the least amount of time for the maximum retention. It feels almost unfair, like hacking your own biology, but it's grounded in science. The spacing effect and the testing effect fuse together into one relentless system. The emotional pull of this technique comes from its precision. There's a strange satisfaction in opening your app and being told exactly what you need to review today. No wasted effort, no wandering aimlessly through notes. And the moment you flip a card you thought you'd forgotten, only for the answer to surge back, you feel a rush of power, proof that the system is sharpening your memory like a blade. Over days, weeks, months, you witness the impossible. Information that once felt slippery becomes unshakable, locked into long-term memory with almost frightening permanence. Spaced repetition software doesn't just save time, it builds confidence. Each session feels like progress, each review like training your brain to endure. While others cram desperately and forget within days, you carry knowledge forward effortlessly because the system has already beaten forgetting for you. It transforms studying into a rhythm of precision, discipline, and victory, turning your phone or laptop into a weapon that makes your memory unstoppable. Writing margin notes. Writing margin notes is the practice of transforming your textbooks and notebooks from lifeless blocks of text into living conversations between you and the material. Instead of passively reading, you lean in, react, question, and summarize directly in the margins. Those scribbles may look small, but they are sparks of engagement, moments where your brain refuses to be a spectator and instead becomes an active participant in the knowledge being built on the page. The emotional power of margin notes lies in the intimacy they create. A textbook might feel cold, written by someone distant, but when you cover its edges with your questions, connections, and insights, it suddenly becomes yours. Each margin note is a fingerprint, a mark of the exact moment you wrestled with an idea and made it your own. Returning later, you don't just see the author's words, you see your past self, thinking, struggling, growing. It feels personal, almost like a dialogue across time with your own evolving mind. What makes margin notes so transformative is how they ignite memory. A short phrase in the margin can unlock entire chains of reasoning. A scribbled question can challenge you to recall an explanation long after the initial study session. Over time, those quick notes become secret weapons, anchors that guide your recall and sharpen your understanding far beyond what simple highlighting ever could. Writing margin notes turns passive reading into active combat, giving your brain hooks, triggers, and pathways that make knowledge stick with raw clarity. It is not decoration. It is the act of claiming the material as your own, forever etched in your unique voice. Predict, explain, observe, reflect cycles. The predict, explain, observe, reflect cycle is a study technique that transforms passive learning into a living experiment where your brain is constantly engaged in testing reality against expectation. Instead of simply reading or memorizing, you start by making a prediction. What do you think will happen? What outcome do you expect? How will a concept unfold? Then you explain your reasoning, laying bare your current understanding. Next, you observe the actual result through reading, experimenting, or problem solving. And finally, you reflect, comparing your prediction with the truth and adjusting your mental model. The emotional pull of this cycle lies in its tension. Predicting feels risky because you're putting your knowledge to the test before knowing the answer. When you're right, the validation is thrilling, proof that your understanding is solid. When you're wrong, the sting of failure cuts deep, but it's this very discomfort that etches the lesson into your memory. The contrast between what you thought and what reality revealed makes the knowledge unforgettable, almost impossible to lose. What makes this technique so powerful is its ability to make learning feel alive. You're no longer a passive receiver of information. You're a scientist, a detective, constantly testing, adjusting, and evolving. Each cycle becomes a story of curiosity, surprise, and growth. Reflection at the end ties it all together, solidifying the new knowledge and revealing how your thinking has changed. The predict, explain, observe, reflect cycle doesn't just teach you facts. It trains your brain to be fearless in the face of uncertainty, to embrace mistakes as fuel, and to fall in love with the process of discovery itself. Mixed practice sessions. Mixed practice sessions are the deliberate choice to throw yourself into variety instead of comfort, to mix different subjects or problem types in a single study period rather than isolating them neatly. At first, this approach feels chaotic. Your brain resists the constant switching, the discomfort of shifting gears from math to history, from theory to application. But buried inside that friction is the secret to mastery. By refusing to let your mind settle into autopilot, mixed practice forces your brain to stay alert, flexible, and adaptable, training you for the unpredictable challenges of real exams and life itself. The emotional charge of mixed practice comes from its initial frustration. When you focus on one topic at a time, progress feels smooth, almost comforting, but it's an illusion. You feel smart in the moment, but the knowledge fades fast. Mixed practice, by contrast, feels harder, even discouraging, because you constantly stumble when switching tasks. Yet this difficulty is proof that your brain is working harder, building stronger connections, and learning how to retrieve information under pressure. The struggle feels raw, but the results are unforgettable. Over time, mixed practice develops into a weapon of confidence. You train yourself to recall information from unexpected angles, to apply concepts without warning, to solve problems that don't arrive neatly packaged. Exams suddenly feel familiar, not because the questions are easy, but because your brain is used to the chaos. Mixed practice transforms studying from rehearsal into combat training, where unpredictability becomes your advantage. The sessions may feel messy, but the mastery they forge is sharp, resilient, and far ahead of those who cling to the comfort of repetition. Daily micro-summaries. Daily micro-summaries are the art of condensing everything you've learned in a day into short, powerful bursts of writing that lock knowledge into your memory. At the end of each study session or before sleep, you pause and force yourself to summarize the key points in just a few sentences. It doesn't have to be perfect, polished, or detailed. It simply has to capture the essence of what you've absorbed. This act of distillation is what transforms fleeting exposure into lasting understanding. The emotional weight of this technique comes from its simplicity and honesty. When you sit down to write your micro summary, you instantly feel whether you truly understood the day's lessons or merely skimmed over them. If you struggle to explain, the gap stares you in the face. That sting forces you to go back, clarify, and refine until you can capture the idea in your own words. The relief of finally being able to write it down concisely feels like victory, a small but meaningful win at the end of the day. What makes daily micro-summaries so powerful is their cumulative effect. One day summary might feel small, even trivial, but stack them up over a week, a month, a semester, and you suddenly hold a library of crystal clear insights written in your own voice. Reviewing them becomes effortless because each one carries the weight of your personal struggle and triumph, while others reread endless pages of notes, drowning in detail. You can scan through your own distilled wisdom, proof that you didn't just study, you understood. Morning review of previous day's notes. Morning review of the previous day's notes is the act of striking while the memory is still warm, reinforcing what you learned before it begins to fade. When you wake up and revisit the material from the day before, you catch your brain in a state of heightened receptivity, refreshed from sleep, primed to consolidate knowledge. This simple ritual turns fragile, temporary impressions into strong, lasting memories, setting the tone for a day built on mastery rather than forgetting. The emotional charge of this technique comes from its immediacy. You open your notebook in the morning and the words feel familiar, like echoes from yesterday, still alive in your mind. As you retrace them, the fog clears, the connections snap back into place, and the concepts begin to feel permanent. That sense of control, that you are catching the information before it slips away, is deeply empowering. It's like saving a flame before it dies, only to watch it blaze brighter with each review. What makes morning review so powerful is how it compounds over time. Each day, you don't just learn, you reinforce, strengthen, and build upon what came before. While others forget half of yesterday's lesson by the afternoon, you lock it down before the day even begins. And with that, you step into your studies already ahead, already armed with clarity. Morning review transforms knowledge from something fleeting into something solid, giving you the thrill of knowing that you are not losing ground. You are gaining momentum day after day, note after note, until mastery feels inevitable. Evening reflection journaling. Evening reflection journaling is a technique that turns the quiet end of the day into a powerful moment of clarity and growth. Instead of letting your study sessions blur into forgettable hours, you sit down with pen and paper and deliberately revisit what you learned. You write in your own words what stuck, what confused you, and how you felt while studying. This simple act of reflection transforms scattered thoughts into structured understanding, carving yesterday's lessons deeper into your memory so they're waiting for you tomorrow. The emotional weight of this practice comes from the honesty it demands. When the day slows and distractions fade, journaling forces you to confront the truth of your progress. Some entries fill you with pride. You see clearly how much ground you've covered, how concepts that once felt impossible are now part of your vocabulary. Other entries sting, as you're forced to admit what slipped through your grasp or where procrastination stole your focus. Yet it is this raw self-awareness that fuels growth. The act of writing turns vague feelings into concrete insights, showing you not just what you studied, but who you are becoming through the process. Evening reflection journaling also carries a sense of calm and closure. Instead of carrying your study anxieties into sleep, you unload them onto the page, freeing your mind to rest. The brain processes and consolidates what you record, turning fresh knowledge into lasting memory overnight. Over time, flipping through your journal becomes a record of progress, a testament to your persistence, and proof that every night you sharpened your mind a little more. Pre-testing before learning. Pre-testing before learning is the bold act of stepping into the unknown and challenging yourself with questions before you've even studied the material. At first glance, it feels reckless. Why test yourself on something you haven't learned yet? But this technique unlocks something extraordinary. By forcing your brain to guess, to reach, and to struggle in the dark, you create powerful mental hooks that make the real answers stick far more deeply when you encounter them later. The act of failing first transforms passive reading into active discovery. The emotional intensity of pre-testing comes from the raw discomfort it creates. Sitting in front of questions you can't answer feels humiliating, like exposing your ignorance under a spotlight. Most people avoid that feeling at all costs, clinging to the safety of study before testing. But when you embrace the sting of failure, you flip it into a weapon. Each wrong attempt, each wild guess, primes your memory to lock onto the correct answer with 10 times the force. What once felt painful now feels exhilarating because you know every miss is sharpening the edge of your recall. Pre-testing rewires the way you absorb information. Instead of passively drifting through material, your brain becomes alert, on guard, hunting for the answers you failed to produce earlier. The result is deeper engagement, stronger retention, and the thrill of watching yourself grow from confusion to clarity. This technique doesn't just test knowledge, it forges it, turning ignorance into an opportunity for mastery. Pre-testing before learning is more than preparation. It is a declaration that you are unafraid of failure because you know it is the very soil in which memory takes root. Studying multiple sources. Studying multiple sources is the technique of refusing to be trapped in the narrow perspective of a single textbook, lecture, or teacher. Instead of relying on one voice, you explore the same concept through different authors, videos, articles, and explanations, layering perspective upon perspective until the subject takes on depth and clarity. Each source adds a new angle, a new example, a new way of framing the truth, and suddenly the material feels alive instead of flat. The emotional power of this technique lies in the frustration it breaks apart. You know the feeling of reading a passage again and again, only to feel more confused than before. That confusion breeds doubt, a sinking belief that maybe you're not smart enough. But when you turn to another source and the same concept is explained with fresh words or visuals, clarity hits like lightning. That moment of breakthrough carries a rush of relief and pride. You realize it wasn't your intelligence that failed, it was the presentation. Studying multiple sources also builds intellectual confidence. When you've seen an idea explained in 5 different ways, it becomes unshakable. You no longer cling to a single fragile definition, but hold the concept in a flexible, living form. This flexibility makes recall under pressure far easier because your brain has multiple pathways to reach the answer. While others are chained to one book or one set of notes, you've built a fortress of understanding fortified by diverse perspectives. Every new source isn't just another explanation, it's another weapon, making you unstoppable in your grasp of knowledge. Contrasting examples. Contrasting examples is the technique of learning by setting opposites side by side, forcing your brain to sharpen its understanding through comparison. Instead of memorizing a concept in isolation, you study it alongside something similar yet different, and in that tension, the boundaries of meaning snap into focus. It is the difference between knowing vaguely and knowing precisely, between being able to parrot definitions and being able to wield them with clarity when it matters most. The emotional force of this method comes from the aha moments it sparks. Imagine learning the definition of mitosis. On its own, it may feel abstract and foggy, but when you place it next to meiosis, suddenly the distinctions come alive, the number of divisions, the outcomes, the purposes. Each difference etches itself deeper because the contrast makes the details unforgettable. It's like looking at light only after you've seen shadow. Suddenly, the edges sharpen and the concept feels real. Contrasting examples also crush the illusion of knowledge. Reading a single explanation can trick you into thinking you've mastered it, but testing it against a rival concept proves whether you truly understand. That confrontation can sting at first, realizing how easily you confuse terms or misapply rules, but that sting hardens into mastery when you revisit and refine. Over time, the brain begins to crave these comparisons, building categories, distinctions, and clarity that ordinary study cannot deliver. Contrasting examples transform your mind from a passive container of facts into a blade that cuts cleanly, leaving no room for confusion, only precision. Working through case studies. Working through case studies is a technique that drags knowledge out of theory and hurls it into the raw chaos of reality. Instead of memorizing definitions or rehearsing steps, you're thrown into a story, a real or simulated scenario where concepts collide with consequences. A case study doesn't ask if you know the material, it asks if you can use it. You're forced to analyze messy details, identify patterns, and apply what you've learned to solve problems that feel alive, unpredictable, and urgent. The emotional force of case studies comes from their intensity. Reading a textbook can lull you into false confidence, but a case study exposes you. Suddenly, there's no neat chapter summary to guide you, no step-by-step instructions. You have to think critically, connect dots, and make decisions under pressure. At first, it's uncomfortable, even overwhelming, because the safety of theory disappears. But that very discomfort is what forges mastery. Every wrong turn, every failed attempt, every aha moment etches the lesson deeper than hours of passive study ever could. What makes working through case studies unforgettable is the sense of ownership it creates. You're no longer a spectator of knowledge. You're an active participant, wrestling with it, testing it, proving it in action. The stories stick because they carry emotion, the frustration of confusion, the thrill of breakthroughs, the satisfaction of solving something complex. When exam questions or real-life challenges appear, your mind doesn't just recall facts, it recalls the lived experience of conquering them in the safety of practice. Case studies transform information into instinct. Analyzing solved problems. Analyzing solved problems is the discipline of slowing down and dissecting the blueprint of mastery laid out before you. Instead of rushing past examples or skimming through worked solutions, you pause and study each step as if it were a secret code. You ask why the solution begins this way, why this method is chosen over another, why each transition makes sense. The process transforms a lifeless answer key into a living teacher, guiding you through the exact thinking that experts use. By breaking apart these solved problems, you train your brain to see patterns, strategies, and shortcuts that blind repetition could never reveal. The emotional weight of this technique comes from the humility it demands. At first, it's tempting to skim, nodding along as if everything is obvious. But when you force yourself to justify each move, you often realize how much you are glossing over. That sting of realizing you couldn't have produced the step on your own can feel frustrating, even disheartening. Yet this discomfort is the fire that forges real understanding. Each moment of confusion becomes an opportunity to drill deeper until the reasoning feels natural. Over time, analyzing solved problems reshapes the way you approach challenges. You begin to recognize familiar moves in unfamiliar questions, as if you've trained your mind to see the hidden map behind the problem. What once seemed overwhelming becomes approachable because you've internalized not just the answers, but the logic that creates them. Analyzing solved problems is not passive. It is a dialogue with expertise, a chance to borrow the vision of those ahead of you until it becomes your own. Incremental learning is the practice of breaking enormous, intimidating subjects into small, digestible pieces and mastering them step by step, day by day. Instead of cramming, instead of drowning in complexity, you commit to gradual growth, layering new knowledge on top of old until it becomes something vast and unshakable. It is slow, deliberate, and at times frustrating, but it mirrors how the human brain naturally thrives, not in leaps, but in steady, compounding steps. The emotional force of incremental learning lies in its patience. At first, progress feels invisible. You might study for an hour and wonder if you've learned anything at all. Doubt creeps in, whispering that you're wasting time. But then, weeks later, the shock hits. You can explain concepts that once left you paralyzed, solve problems that once felt impossible. That quiet realization that you've built something brick by brick without even noticing fills you with pride that no cram session could ever deliver. Incremental learning also rewires your relationship with failure. Instead of seeing mistakes as dead ends, you see them as natural steps in the climb, temporary obstacles smoothed out over repeated exposure. Each small correction becomes part of the long arc of mastery. Over time, the subject that once felt like a mountain shrinks beneath your feet, and you stand at the summit with the unshakable confidence that no detail escaped you. While others burn themselves out in desperate marathons of study, incremental learning makes you relentless, turning knowledge into something you own forever, piece by piece, until you are untouchable. Breaking material into levels. Breaking material into levels is the art of taming overwhelming complexity by slicing it into layers of difficulty, building from the simplest foundations to the most advanced details. Instead of drowning in a sea of information, you climb it step by step, turning chaos into a structured ladder that your brain can actually ascend. Each level becomes a checkpoint of mastery, proof that you've conquered one stage before moving on to the next, transforming impossible challenges into achievable victories. The emotional power of this method comes from the shift it creates in how you perceive difficulty. Faced with a dense textbook or a massive syllabus, fear and paralysis can take hold. You feel small, incapable, defeated before you even begin. But when you break the material down, the monster shrinks. You no longer face the whole beast at once. You tackle it in pieces, each one within your reach. And every time you complete a level, you feel the thrill of progress, the rush of knowing you've climbed higher than you were yesterday. This technique doesn't just organize your study, it rewires your confidence. By layering information, you create a scaffold that supports deeper understanding, where advanced concepts feel natural because they're built on solid foundations. Over time, you stop fearing complexity and start craving it, because you know you can dismantle it into parts you can conquer. Breaking material into levels is not just strategy, it's empowerment. It turns overwhelming mountains into staircases, and each step forward ignites the pride of knowing you are rising steadily toward mastery. Recording yourself, teaching. Recording yourself teaching is one of the most powerful ways to expose the truth about what you know and what you only think you know. When you take a concept, switch on a recorder, and begin explaining it as though you're teaching a class, you strip away the comfort of silent study and confront the raw clarity or confusion of your understanding. Speaking forces you to organize ideas, connect them smoothly, and simplify them into a flow that others could follow. The moment you stumble, hesitate, or lose track of your words, you've uncovered the exact places where your knowledge is fragile. The emotional force of this technique lies in its vulnerability. Hearing your own voice back can be jarring, even uncomfortable. You notice every pause, every gap, every moment where your explanation collapses under its own weight. But that discomfort is fuel. It pushes you to refine, to polish, to rebuild your knowledge until your explanations run clean and confident. Each recording becomes a mirror, reflecting both your strengths and your weaknesses in a way you cannot ignore. Over time, recording yourself teaching becomes exhilarating. You begin to hear your progress, to notice how explanations that once felt clumsy now flow with sharpness and authority. It gives you the confidence of a teacher, not just a student, and that shift changes everything. When you can explain an idea clearly out loud, without notes, you don't just know it, you own it. Recording yourself teaching turns solitary study into a performance of mastery, where your own voice becomes proof that you are rising above the ordinary. Recording yourself. Recording yourself teaching is one of the most powerful ways to expose the truth about what you know and what you only think you know. When you take a concept, switch on a recorder, and begin explaining it as though you're teaching a class, you strip away the comfort of silent study and confront the raw clarity or confusion of your understanding. Speaking forces you to organize ideas, connect them smoothly, and simplify them into a flow that others could follow. The moment you stumble, hesitate, or lose track of your words, you've uncovered the exact places where your knowledge is fragile. The emotional force of this technique lies in its vulnerability. Hearing your own voice back can be jarring, even uncomfortable. You notice every pause, every gap, every moment where your explanation collapses under its own weight. But that discomfort is fuel. It pushes you to refine, to polish, to rebuild your knowledge until your explanations run clean and confident. Each recording becomes a mirror, reflecting both your strengths and your weaknesses in a way you cannot ignore. Over time, recording yourself teaching becomes exhilarating. You begin to hear your progress, to notice how explanations that once felt clumsy now flow with sharpness and authority. It gives you the confidence of a teacher, not just a student, and that shift changes everything. When you can explain an idea clearly out loud, without notes, you don't just know it, you own it. Recording yourself teaching turns solitary study into a performance of mastery, where your own voice becomes proof that you are rising above the ordinary. Silent recall before checking notes. Silent recall before checking notes is a deceptively simple but fiercely powerful technique that separates true learners from passive pretenders. Instead of rushing to reread your notes the moment you feel uncertain, you first stop, close your eyes, and force your brain to retrieve everything it can in silence. No books, no hints, no safety nets, just you and your memory. It feels raw, even uncomfortable, because it exposes exactly how much you actually know, not how much you wish you knew. The emotional grip of this method lies in the tension it creates. As you sit there in silence, straining to pull details from the dark corners of your mind, frustration rises, doubt whispers that you've forgotten it all. But then, like sparks in the dark, fragments appear, key terms, core ideas, connections, and slowly the fog clears. That moment of recall, born out of struggle, carries an intensity that cements the memory far more deeply than simply rereading ever could. When you finally check your notes afterward, the effect is electrifying. Every mistake stings, every forgotten detail hits with force, and those corrections brand themselves into your mind. Each gap revealed becomes an opportunity, and every accurate recall feels like a triumph. Over time, this ritual of silent struggle followed by feedback builds confidence that is unshakable. You're no longer passively hoping you'll remember. You've trained your brain to perform under pressure. While others lean on their notes like a crutch, you sharpen your mind into a blade, honed by silence and tested against the truth of recall. Role play, learning scenarios. Role play learning scenarios are the act of stepping out of the passive role of student and into the living skin of the subject itself. Instead of merely reading or memorizing, you become the scientist, the lawyer, the doctor, the historian, the negotiator. You take on the role, act out the scenario, and let the knowledge unfold in real time as if you were inside the problem rather than outside looking in. This immersion electrifies learning, transforming abstract theories into lived experiences that your brain can't help but remember. The emotional power of role play comes from the intensity of embodiment. When you argue as if you're a lawyer in court, the facts stop being lifeless. They become weapons you must wield with conviction. When you act as a doctor diagnosing a patient, medical knowledge stops being lines on a page. It becomes the difference between life and death in your imagined world. The adrenaline of performance, the pressure of taking on responsibility, locks the knowledge into your mind with a force no amount of passive study could ever achieve. Role play also breaks through the monotony that kills motivation. It injects drama, energy, and emotion into the learning process, making study sessions feel like rehearsals for real life. And when you return to the exam room, you don't just recall information, you recall experiences, conversations, arguments, and decisions you once acted out. Those memories are sharper, more vivid, more enduring. Role-play learning scenarios transform knowledge from something you know into something you have lived, and once lived, it never leaves you. Exam simulation under time pressure. Exam simulation under time pressure is a study technique that strips away comfort and throws you into the raw intensity of the real test before it ever arrives. It's not just about answering questions. It's about sitting in silence with the clock ticking, your notes out of reach, and the weight of the countdown pressing against your focus. Every second becomes precious. Every decision feels urgent, and your brain is forced to perform at full capacity under the same conditions you'll face when it truly matters. The emotional power of this technique comes from its unforgiving honesty. Without the safety of pausing or looking things up, you're exposed to your real level of readiness. The first attempts can sting. You freeze, you waste time, you watch the minutes evaporate while your confidence crumbles. Yet it's in this very discomfort that the transformation begins. Each failure toughens you. Each near miss teaches you how to think faster, plan smarter, and manage the storm of adrenaline that exams unleash. What makes exam simulation under time pressure extraordinary is the resilience it builds. Over time, the panic fades, replaced by a calm sharpness. Your brain learns to allocate time strategically, to push through doubt, to focus relentlessly on what matters most. The exam stops feeling like an ambush and starts feeling like familiar territory. By rehearsing the battle in advance, you turn fear into preparation and chaos into control, walking into the real exam not as a victim of pressure, but as a master of it. Interrogative questioning. Interrogative questioning is the relentless habit of refusing to accept information at face value and demanding to know why. Instead of passively memorizing a formula, a theory, or a definition, you pierce deeper, asking, why does this step matter? Why does this rule hold true? Why does this work at all? This constant interrogation turns learning from blind obedience into active discovery. Each why is a hammer that breaks the surface, revealing the underlying structure that makes knowledge durable, logical, and unforgettable. The emotional charge of interrogative questioning comes from the way it ignites curiosity and discomfort at the same time. At first, the questions can feel frustrating, even destabilizing, because often you realize you don't actually know the answers. That sting is powerful. It exposes the cracks you were content to overlook and forces you to confront the emptiness behind rote memorization. But once you dig in and uncover the reasoning, the satisfaction is electric. Suddenly, the concept is no longer fragile. It is alive with meaning, locked into your mind with an anchor that shallow learning can never provide. This technique transforms you into an active thinker rather than a passive receiver. It creates a sense of intellectual hunger, a drive to chase understanding until it bends to your will. Over time, your brain begins to crave the why automatically, refusing to settle for surface-level answers. And when you face challenges under pressure, exams, debates, or real-world problems, you carry not just the knowledge, but the reasoning behind it, making you unshakable. Interrogative questioning turns study into exploration, and exploration into mastery. Creating flowcharts. Creating flowcharts is the act of transforming complex, tangled information into a visual stream of clarity. Instead of letting ideas swirl around in fragments, you map them out as a sequence of connected steps, decisions, or concepts. Each box, each arrow, becomes a bridge in a chain that turns chaos into order. By laying information out this way, you force your brain to see not just isolated facts, but the relationships that drive them, the flow, the cause and effect, the structure hiding beneath the surface. The emotional power of flowcharts comes from the relief they provide. A messy subject can feel like a storm inside your head, scattered, overwhelming, impossible to hold all at once. But as you begin to draw, the storm settles, confusion untangles, patterns emerge, and suddenly you can breathe again. Watching the pieces lock into place brings a surge of control, as though you've bent the complexity to your will. The act of sketching feels less like note-taking and more like building a map to guide you through the wilderness of knowledge. Flowcharts also trigger memory in a unique way. Visual connections stick. You don't just remember a concept, you remember where it sits on the chart, what it connects to, and how the arrows move. In an exam or high-pressure moment, that mental map resurfaces, guiding you step by step until the answer clicks. While others drown in paragraphs of notes, you recall the image of your flowchart, and with it, the entire logic it represents. Creating flowcharts isn't just studying, it's engineering clarity, forging order out of confusion, and making knowledge something you can see, follow, and own. Using sticky notes for quick recall. Using sticky notes for quick recall is the practice of turning your environment into a living memory palace, surrounding yourself with flashes of knowledge that demand attention every time your eyes fall on them. Instead of burying facts inside a notebook you rarely open, you plaster them onto your world, on your desk, your mirror, your laptop, even your wall, forcing your brain to encounter them again and again until recall becomes effortless. Each sticky note becomes a trigger, a spark that keeps the information alive. The emotional force of this method comes from its constant presence. Imagine walking past your door and seeing a sticky note with a key formula or vocabulary word staring back at you. At first, it feels like a nuisance, an interruption, but over time, that repetition works its way under your skin, carving the knowledge into your memory without you even trying. And when you finally retrieve it in an exam or real-world situation, it feels almost magical, like the sticky note has been whispering the answer to you all along. What makes this technique so powerful is the sense of ownership it creates. Your notes stop being buried in books. They invade your space, your routine, your life. You feel surrounded by knowledge, immersed in it, unable to escape it until it's yours. Sticky notes make learning tactile, visual, and unavoidable, turning every glance into a moment of study. It's not just memorization, it's ambush training for the brain, ensuring that what you need most is always within sight and eventually always within reach. Poster summarization on one page. Poster summarization on one page is a technique that forces you to compress an entire universe of knowledge into a single visual snapshot. Instead of drowning in scattered notes and endless chapters, you distill the core ideas, diagrams, keywords, and connections onto one sheet that serves as both a map and a mirror of your understanding. The act of reducing complexity into simplicity is where the power lies, because if you can capture it all on one page, it means you truly grasp the essence. The emotional impact of this method comes from its clarity. There's something almost exhilarating about watching chaos transform into order before your eyes. At first, it feels impossible. How can so much fit onto so little? But as you wrestle with the material, stripping away the unnecessary, reorganizing what matters, your mind begins to see the subject not as fragments, but as a whole. That single page becomes a symbol of mastery, a visual anchor that sparks confidence every time you glance at it. What makes poster summarization unforgettable is its creativity. You don't just write, you design. Arrows, colors, sketches, boxes, and flowcharts turn words into a living system, a story your brain loves to revisit. It engages logic and imagination at once, making memory stronger and recall faster. When exam day comes, you won't remember pages of scattered notes. You'll remember the poster, the one-page universe you built, and everything it represents. In that moment, you realize you didn't just study. You created a masterpiece of understanding. Rephrasing in simpler terms. Rephrasing in simpler terms is the act of stripping knowledge of its complexity and bending it into words that feel natural, human, and unforgettable. Instead of clinging to heavy jargon, you take an idea and retell it as if you were explaining it to a child or to yourself on your most tired day. This isn't dumbing things down, it's sharpening them, distilling the essence of meaning until it's so clear that your brain can hold it without effort. If you can explain it simply, you've proven you truly understand it. The emotional weight of this technique comes from the clarity it delivers. When you first encounter a dense definition or a complicated explanation, it can feel suffocating, as though the subject is locked behind a wall of words. That frustration gnaws at your confidence, making you believe the material is out of reach. But when you force yourself to rephrase, when you succeed in transforming confusion into plain language, the fog lifts. The relief is powerful. It's the moment knowledge stops being something foreign and becomes something that belongs to you. Over time, rephrasing in simpler terms transforms your relationship with learning. Information stops feeling like a burden to carry and becomes something you can use, share, and teach. It builds confidence because you know you're not just memorizing, you're mastering. Every time you reduce complexity into simplicity, you prove that your mind has absorbed the concept at its core. This technique turns studying into an act of liberation, where clarity replaces struggle and understanding becomes effortless strength. Using songs or rhythms for memory. Using songs or rhythms for memory taps into one of the most primal powers of the human brain, its love for music. Long before we could read or write, we remembered through rhythm, chants, drum beats, melodies woven into culture and survival. This technique takes that ancient instinct and weaponizes it for study. By turning dry facts, formulas, or lists into rhymes, jingles, or even full songs, you embed knowledge in the same grooves where your favorite lyrics live, the ones you can't stop humming, the ones that never leave. The emotional strength of this method comes from its joy. Studying often feels heavy, suffocating under pressure and monotony, but when you set your material to a beat, the burden lifts. You find yourself tapping your foot, singing along, smiling as information that once felt impossible suddenly becomes playful. The rhythm itself does the work, anchoring details in your memory without the painful grind of repetition. What makes songs and rhythms so powerful is their stickiness. Long after you've closed your books, the melody replays in your head, dragging the facts along with it. Even in high-stress moments, like sitting in an exam hall, the rhythm resurfaces, guiding your recall as effortlessly as a chorus you've known for years. While others struggle to drag answers out of fading memory, you hum your way to success, riding the current of rhythm straight to the solution. This technique transforms learning from a chore into something vibrant, where knowledge dances with music and becomes unforgettable. Using sticky notes for quick recall. Using sticky notes for quick recall is the practice of turning your environment into a living memory palace, surrounding yourself with flashes of knowledge that demand attention every time your eyes fall on them. Instead of burying facts inside a notebook you rarely open, you plaster them onto your world, on your desk, your mirror, your laptop, even your wall, forcing your brain to encounter them again and again until recall becomes effortless. Each sticky note becomes a trigger, a spark that keeps the information alive. The emotional force of this method comes from its constant presence. Imagine walking past your door and seeing a sticky note with a key formula or vocabulary word staring back at you. At first, it feels like a nuisance, an interruption, but over time, that repetition works its way under your skin, carving the knowledge into your memory without you even trying. And when you finally retrieve it in an exam or real-world situation, it feels almost magical, like the sticky note has been whispering the answer to you all along. What makes this technique so powerful is the sense of ownership it creates. Your notes stop being buried in books. They invade your space, your routine, your life. You feel surrounded by knowledge, immersed in it, unable to escape it until it's yours. Sticky notes make learning tactile, visual, and unavoidable, turning every glance into a moment of study. It's not just memorization, it's ambush training for the brain, ensuring that what you need most is always within sight, and eventually always within reach. Poster summarization on one page. Poster summarization on one page is a technique that forces you to compress an entire universe of knowledge into a single visual snapshot. Instead of drowning in scattered notes and endless chapters, you distill the core ideas, diagrams, keywords, and connections onto one sheet that serves as both a map and a mirror of your understanding. The act of reducing complexity into simplicity is where the power lies, because if you can capture it all on one page, it means you truly grasp the essence. The emotional impact of this method comes from its clarity. There's something almost exhilarating about watching chaos transform into order before your eyes. At first, it feels impossible. How can so much fit onto so little? But as you wrestle with the material, stripping away the unnecessary, reorganizing what matters, your mind begins to see the subject not as fragments, but as a whole. That single page becomes a symbol of mastery, a visual anchor that sparks confidence every time you glance at it. What makes poster summarization unforgettable is its creativity. You don't just write, you design. Arrows, colors, sketches, boxes, and flowcharts turn words into a living system, a story your brain loves to revisit. It engages logic and imagination at once, making memory stronger and recall faster. When exam day comes, you won't remember pages of scattered notes. You'll remember the poster, the one-page universe you built, and everything it represents. In that moment, you realize you didn't just study, you created a masterpiece of understanding. Creating contrast tables, pros, cons, differences. Creating contrast tables is the discipline of forcing clarity by laying ideas side by side, exposing their strengths, weaknesses, and distinctions in a way the mind cannot ignore. Instead of letting concepts blur together in a fog of half memory, you slice them apart, aligning their features, pros and cons, or defining traits in a simple visual table. The moment you do this, confusion dissolves, and what once felt tangled suddenly snaps into sharp relief. You no longer just know the information, you see it. The emotional charge of this technique comes from the empowerment it delivers. When two theories, processes, or historical events feel maddeningly similar, the frustration can feel suffocating. But when you force yourself to compare them point by point, the tension breaks. Differences leap off the page, strengths shine brighter, and weaknesses reveal themselves with brutal honesty. The sense of control you feel in that moment is addictive. You've taken chaos and turned it into order with nothing more than a table. Contrast tables also train your brain to think critically rather than passively. By weighing options, highlighting trade-offs, and surfacing patterns, you deepen understanding far beyond rote memorization. And in the heat of an exam or debate, your memory doesn't give you scattered fragments. It hands you the clear picture of the table you built, row by row. Creating contrast tables transforms studying into a process of sharpening, cutting away the dull edges until what remains is pure clarity. It's the act of turning confusion into certainty and walking away with knowledge that feels structured, unshakable, and ready for battle. Debate method with peers. The debate method with peers is a study technique that transforms learning into a battlefield of ideas. Instead of quietly reviewing notes in isolation, you face off against classmates or friends, arguing for and against concepts, theories, or solutions. This clash of perspectives forces you to think quickly, defend your understanding, and attack weaknesses in reasoning. The heat of debate strips away passive learning and replaces it with active engagement, where only true comprehension survives. The emotional fire of this technique comes from the intensity of the exchange. In the moment, your heart races, your mind sharpens, and you feel the pressure of defending your stance. When your argument holds, there's a surge of pride. When it crumbles, the sting of defeat carves the lesson into your memory deeper than quiet study ever could. Every rebuttal, every counterpoint forces you to refine your knowledge until it's sharp enough to withstand scrutiny. Debating with peers also unlocks the hidden power of perspective. You hear ideas you never considered, questions that challenge your assumptions, and explanations that illuminate blind spots. These sparks of insight ignite understanding in ways solitary study cannot. The process is messy, emotional, even exhausting, but it forges mastery. While others memorize words they barely grasp, you leave the debate hall with concepts burned into you, tested in fire. The debate method is more than studying, it is training for intellectual combat, where knowledge becomes armor and argument becomes the blade that makes you unshakable. Using spaced reminders on phone. Using spaced reminders on your phone is the act of weaponizing technology to work with your memory rather than against it. Instead of relying on willpower to remember when to review, you set reminders at carefully timed intervals that pull knowledge back into your awareness just as you're about to forget it. Each vibration, each notification becomes a summons to strengthen recall, turning your phone, so often a source of distraction, into a relentless ally in mastery. The emotional power of this method comes from its persistence. At first, the reminders may feel intrusive, even annoying, interrupting your flow with prompts to review, but with each recall session, you feel a surge of control, like you're hacking your own brain, reinforcing knowledge at the precise moment it matters most. What once slipped through your fingers begins to feel anchored, unshakable. That quiet satisfaction builds with every ding of your phone, transforming distraction into discipline. What makes spaced reminders on your phone extraordinary is the way they dissolve excuses. You can't say you forgot to study. Your phone refuses to let you. Knowledge seeps into the cracks of your day, on the bus, between tasks, during a walk, turning idle moments into bursts of progress. Over weeks and months, this drip feed of reinforcement compounds, leaving you sharper, faster, and more prepared than those who rely on last-minute cramming. Spaced reminders on your phone transform a tool of procrastination into a tool of dominance, ensuring that forgetting is no longer your default. Remembering is. Two-column method. The two-column method is a deceptively simple yet deeply powerful study technique that forces you to actively interact with your notes instead of passively consuming them. On one side of the page, you write down questions, prompts, or keywords, and on the other, you record the answers, explanations, or details. This separation transforms your notes from a wall of text into a dynamic dialogue with yourself, a constant challenge to recall, explain, and connect information rather than just stare at it. The emotional force of this technique comes from how it exposes your strengths and weaknesses with brutal clarity. When you cover the answer side and test yourself with only the questions, there's no hiding. You either know it or you don't. That sting of realizing what you've forgotten hits hard, but it's exactly what drives you to strengthen those weak points. And when you recall the answer perfectly, the surge of confidence is addictive, a tangible reminder that your efforts are paying off. What makes the two-column method unforgettable is how it transforms studying into active retrieval practice, disguised as note-taking. The question column keeps your brain alert, curious, and engaged, while the answer column becomes your safety net and review guide. Over time, those questions start echoing in your head, triggering answers without hesitation. The page itself becomes a battlefield where you fought and conquered confusion, turning notes from static words into living memory. With every question you ask and every answer you prove, you sharpen your knowledge into something unshakable. Pre-learn before lectures. Pre-learning before lectures is the secret weapon that transforms you from a passive listener into an active predator of knowledge. Instead of walking into class blind, waiting to be spoon-fed information, you arm yourself in advance by skimming the material, reading summaries, or previewing key concepts. This small step flips the entire learning experience upside down. Suddenly, the lecture is no longer your first encounter with the topic. It's your second, your reinforcement, your chance to deepen rather than struggle. The emotional impact of pre-learning is profound. Without it, lectures often feel overwhelming. Words fly past, slides blur together, and you scramble just to keep up. Frustration builds, and by the end, you're exhausted but unsure what you actually retain. But when you've glimpsed the material beforehand, everything changes. Familiarity creates confidence. Instead of drowning, you find yourself nodding along, recognizing terms, connecting dots, and asking sharper questions. Each moment of recognition feels like a victory, proof that you're ahead of the curve while others are still trying to catch up. Pre-learning doesn't just prepare you, it primes your brain to learn faster. It activates curiosity because when you preview material, you inevitably generate questions, and those questions act like magnets, pulling your attention toward the answers as the lecture unfolds. The result is deeper engagement, stronger retention, and the thrill of feeling in control of your learning. Pre-learning before lectures is more than preparation. It's walking into the room already armed, ready to seize knowledge while others are still trying to find their footing. It is the difference between surviving a lecture and mastering it. Annotating slides during lectures. Annotating slides during lectures is the act of transforming passive listening into active engagement by seizing the professor's visuals and making them your own. Instead of just watching the slides roll by, you capture them, either by printing them, downloading them, or scribbling directly on them, and inject your own notes, arrows, highlights, and questions. This process forces you to interact with the material in real time, catching nuances, clarifications, and side comments that never appear in the official slides. It turns the lecture from a fleeting performance into a personal record tailored to your mind. The emotional power of annotating slides comes from the ownership it creates. While everyone else stares blankly at the screen, you're actively molding the lecture into something living. Every highlight marks importance, every margin note captures insight, and every doodle or arrow reflects a connection you forged on the spot. Later, when you revisit those slides, you don't just see the static text. You relive the lecture, hearing the professor's voice in your head, recalling the moment the idea clicked, or the question you wrote in frustration. This technique also turns studying into an act of personalization. The slides are no longer generic. They're yours, marked with your curiosity, your struggles, and your flashes of understanding. Reviewing them becomes easier and more powerful because your brain isn't just recalling words, it's recalling moments. While others reread plain, lifeless slides, you hold in your hands a vivid map of the lecture itself, layered with your insights. Annotating slides doesn't just help you study, it makes you an active participant in learning, forging a bond between the material and your memory that others never achieve. Taking handwritten notes. Taking handwritten notes is the raw, physical act of pulling knowledge out of the air and anchoring it to paper through your own movement, rhythm, and focus. Unlike typing, which is fast but shallow, handwriting forces you to slow down, to distill, to translate information into your own words before your pen even touches the page. This struggle to condense and rephrase is what engraves the material into your memory, making every line of ink a mark of true engagement rather than mindless transcription. The emotional power of handwriting lies in its intimacy. Your notes stop being sterile, digital text and become extensions of you, slanted letters, hurried scrawls, underlines carved in moments of urgency. Each page feels alive, a personal artifact of your learning journey, carrying the weight of your concentration, frustration, and breakthroughs. Returning to those notes later is like opening a time capsule of your own effort, and the familiarity of your handwriting sparks recall in a way typed notes never can. What makes handwritten notes unforgettable is the sense of craftsmanship. Every diagram, margin scribble, or emphasized word becomes a visual landmark that guides your memory back to the core ideas. The act of writing transforms your study into creation. You're not just receiving knowledge, you're shaping it. And with every stroke of the pen, you feel more connected, more invested, more in control. Taking handwritten notes is not about neatness. It's about carving your learning into something tangible, personal, and enduring. A map of mastery written in your own hand. Rewriting notes neatly is a studied technique that takes the scattered chaos of rushed scribbles and transforms it into a polished framework your brain can finally breathe in. It's not just about tidiness. It's about revisiting information with intention, reprocessing every word as you rewrite, reorganizing the clutter into structure, and carving clarity out of confusion. Each stroke of the pen becomes an act of reflection, a chance to reinforce what matters and discard what doesn't. The emotional weight of this method lies in its therapeutic rhythm. When you sit down to rewrite, you slow the pace, giving your mind the chance to engage deeply with the material. Facts that once felt overwhelming start falling into order, like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. And as the pages in front of you shift from messy fragments to clean, structured notes, you feel the relief of control returning. That transformation doesn't just organize your notebook, it organizes your thoughts, leaving you calmer, sharper, and more confident. What makes rewriting notes neatly unforgettable is the pride it instills. Flipping through a notebook that's clean, legible, and beautifully structured feels empowering, like holding a personal textbook written in your own language. The act of rewriting etches the material deeper into memory because you're not just copying, you're filtering, condensing, and reteaching yourself in the process. It turns study from a stressful scramble into a deliberate craft. Every neat page becomes proof that you've wrestled with the chaos and emerged with order, ready to recall it when it counts the most. Condensing notes to one page. Condensing notes to one page is the art of distilling chaos into clarity, stripping an ocean of information down to its sharpest, most essential form. Instead of lugging around stacks of notes that bury you in detail, you force yourself to decide what truly matters and fit it onto a single sheet. This ruthless condensation demands precision. Only the key ideas, only the vital formulas, only the unforgettable cues survive. The result is not just a summary, but a weapon, a page so focused it becomes a map to mastery. The emotional pull of this technique comes from the relief it delivers. At first, your notes may feel endless, overwhelming, like a storm with no center. The stress of too much information can suffocate your confidence. But when you sit down and cut, refine, and rewrite, the noise fades. What remains is clarity, a bird's-eye view of the subject that makes everything manageable. Holding that single page in your hands feels empowering. You've taken control of the chaos and reshaped it into something simple, portable, and powerful. This technique also rewires your memory. The act of condensing forces you to engage with the material, to analyze, prioritize, and decide what's truly important. That process itself strengthens recall. embedding the essentials deeper into your mind. And in moments of pressure, before an exam, during revision, that one page becomes your lifeline, a snapshot of the knowledge you worked so hard to master. Condensing notes to one page is more than organization. It's transformation, the proof that mastery lies not in how much you write, but in how much you understand. Shuffling flashcards. Randomly shuffling flashcards randomly is a deceptively simple technique that dismantles the illusion of mastery and forces your brain to stay sharp. When you review cards in the same order every time, your memory grows lazy. It begins to rely on sequence rather than true understanding. By shuffling them, you rip away that safety net, confronting each card as an isolated challenge. Suddenly, you're not coasting through a predictable routine. You're ambushed by knowledge from every angle, and that unpredictability trains your brain to recall information no matter the context. The emotional weight of this method comes from the discomfort it creates. At first, the randomness feels unfair, even frustrating, as you're caught off guard by questions you thought you knew. But it's in that very discomfort that growth happens. The sting of being thrown off balance hardens your recall, forcing you to retrieve information without crutches. Each time you get it right, there's a rush of pride, proof that you truly know the material, not just the order. Shuffling flashcards also mirrors real-life challenges. Exams, conversations, and problem-solving situations don't hand you questions in neat sequences. They strike at random. By practicing in the chaos of shuffled decks, you condition yourself for unpredictability. Over time, the randomness becomes your ally, sharpening your confidence and resilience. While others rely on the comfort of patterns, you're preparing for reality, where mastery means being ready for anything. Shuffling flashcards may feel like adding chaos to study, but within that chaos lies the discipline that separates surface learners from true experts.